love the theme. All in. When you're all in, you are committed, fully committed, not only professionally, and I think that's been a theme of kind of Cafe X. It's a business, but it's also very personal. And we're not going to do things that we don't feel.
One, all in means all in for this region. We are part of this region. We need to be counted as part of that region, right? The region needs to take us all in.
For us at the Education Department for San Pasqual, all in means we want to service the whole community and the whole individual.
So when we're all in, we have to be willing to take risk. We have to be able to stay there for the long haul.
The other side to all in is us being all in. No matter what happens to us, no matter what's thrown at us from the Mexican government or the US government, we're all in for our community and our binational way of life.
As you go to somewhere and you find out what is it that they need right now, and you support what they need right now.
All in means that it's more than just giving of time. This energy is very expensive. You know, energy is very expensive. It's more expensive than time.
If I'm going to be somewhere and committed to an organization and to the work that I'm doing, I need to be all in, and I don't know how to be part way.
It's about merging two seemingly disparate things, you know, when we think about head and heart, but bringing that together. And so when you're all in, you're trying to find that balance.
All in means that we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that this initiative and this ecosystem is built and is sustainable for all of us, because ultimately we all win and we all benefit from it.
Lean into it, you know, and I say lean into your work. I put that expectation on myself, and I feel like, you know, I put that expectation on the people that I want to work with, because I think anybody who's working collectively in a team, you want to feel that you're pulling in the same direction.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Annual Conference of Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties, All In. We're so happy to be here with you today. My name is Megan Thomas, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am your president and CEO at Catalyst. This year, for the past couple of years, we've experienced extraordinary things, and we've returned with extraordinary compassion, a sense of urgency, and a drive for change. We're here today in the studio in Barrio Logan, also the land of the Kumeyaay people. This is a people who have been here for millennia and who are still with us today. One thing I've learned from Indigenous wisdom is to know ourselves as in relation, as together, connected to one another. And what that means is that we must be all in for one another. That my fate, your fate, the fate of everyone around us depends on the wellness of all people and of the planet. And how can we do that work together if we don't know one another? So today's conference is dedicated to giving us more knowledge, more connection, and an opportunity to become in relation with those across the San Diego and Imperial County region. A conference doesn't just happen, and so I really want to thank the many sponsors who've made today possible, as well as our board, our dedicated staff, and the many volunteers who are working with us. And one person in particular that I want to recognize is Nancy Jameson, our beloved former president and CEO, who we sadly lost to cancer over the summer. If there was a person who embodied being all in for her community, modeling vulnerability and the ability to learn and then change, it was Nancy. And so we're happy to dedicate today to her memory and her legacy. So we invite you to settle in, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and be here to listen, to learn, to imagine the connections and the changes that you can make, that we can make together. Knowing that at Catalyst, whether you're a member, a partner, or any other relation to ours, we are with you, all in for change. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, the first of whom is a friend, colleague, and truly a partner in this work, the President and CEO of Grantmakers for Effective Organizations, Marcus Walton. He'll set before us a vision for the future that we're striving forward. He'll put a framework together so that we all can have some themes that we're looking for and some ways to thread our learnings into action. We're excited to be here because all of us at Catalyst, including you, share a vision for an impactful, equitable, collaborative, social change ecosystem. Because the way to get us to the next vision of San Diego and Imperial Counties is to do that together. The way to do that is to be all in. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Marcus Walton.
Hello, and thank you so much for your time and attention today. Thank you to my colleagues at Catalyst for inviting me to give a few words to set the context for a variety of important conversations for my colleagues who are operating locally to advance the kind of change that we all want to see for San Diego and Imperial Counties. It's my pleasure as President and CEO of Grantmakers for Effective Organizations to be with you, to share a little bit about our observations and point of view from a national perspective and connect it into the crux of what brings us here together. That's to imagine what it means to be all in for change. Right? I don't have to tell any of you, you already know that the context today is such that we're still emerging. We're just fighting our way through the emergence of almost 2 years now of a global pandemic, right? Health, economic, political. Suffice it to say, it's probably an understatement to say that so many of us have grappled with ambiguity, understanding what's next. How do we move forward? Certainly from philanthropy, the conversation involves how do we make the kind of impact that finally lives up to our collective aspirations for this sector? And how do we do so in such a way that responds to the conditions that the moment is requiring? This is our challenge. And so one way in which I tend to think about this, especially when introduced for the topic of being all in, I thought about how philanthropy has struggled mightily over the years, leading up to now, before now, and even beyond, perhaps, but struggling mightily with the challenge of responding to support the efforts of individuals and nonprofits who are leading the struggle for social equity, right? And why? This is to create the conditions for change that are more conducive to the thriving that we like to experience across the board, both locally and nationally. So I want to invite you to consider, what does it require? What are these conditions for thriving about which I'm speaking that will move us closer to the type of experience on every level of civil society that we like to see? The first is that we want to be all in for change, right? But this is not as easy perhaps as it sounds. A lot of times we say we want to be all in. Like, yeah, we're all in, but what does this really mean? I would offer that we want to create the conditions that allow for the fullest expression of all people involved, right? This full expression. Some of you may have heard conversations recently about bringing our authentic selves. Perhaps for the philanthropic and nonprofit sector, this is really an invitation to not just bring your authentic voice, not just to find a space for your authentic expression, but to also find a space for your voice to be included in the decision-making process of the change that's happening within our communities. So foundations, communities, grant makers, nonprofit service providers of all types, how might we create a welcome environment, community as a space where all can come together to contribute to the kinds of decision-making that will translate into the quality of life that we all hope and aspire for together. This is the fulfillment of our collective aspiration. This is what it means to be all in for change. We also want to operate as a community. Community is a term that gets tossed around so much, but what we think about as GEO, our Grant Makers for Effective Organizations, when we talk about community, we're referring to a group of people committed to a shared set of values, a shared set of principles, even having a shared understanding of the experiences of the people who are closest to the work, across a set of issues, across a set of dynamics, but understanding how we're all situated and responding to each other with a sense of accountability, right? Building a sense of trust and rapport, and responding to the needs of each group, especially those that are most marginalized or excluded from the mainstream access, the best and the brightest opportunities to ensure that they have a meaningful connection to those resources. So operating as a community brings us closer to that vision for change that we want to see. And we want to reimagine what's possible, right? Reimagining what's possible is critical to creating the conditions within the communities that we serve in order to realize that shared quality of life on a global as well as local level. So easier said than done, some of you may be saying. For San Diego County and beyond, for Imperial counties and beyond, what do we need to know in order to do this? How do we facilitate the kind of change that I just described? I would say that there are three questions that are central to this question. However, the question itself is the way in which I encourage us all to approach this issue. So what do we need to know? First, we need to approach the issue. It serves us to approach the issue with an openness and curiosity for the people closest to the issues. In other words, we need to know, what is our shared experience of America's finest city, right? Who lives here? How are we situated? Under what conditions are we living here? Who works and visits here, right? Understanding how we are differently situated allows us to have a better sense of the types of resources required to arrive at the desired level of thriving that I described earlier, as well as how much is required. Right? So there's a particular understanding of the nuanced experience of those in community that's required to understand how we can be the most effective in our grant-making experience, the most effective in the allocation of resources, the most effective in understanding the types and amounts of resources required for thriving. Unfortunately, as many of you know, when we take a historical look at the conditions that have contributed to how we are today, which is another way of entering into a racial equity analysis, appreciating the differences between groups in order to raise the bar for all and close the gaps between us. The bar has been set too low. And what I mean by that is the conditions within the community, within our nation, were intentionally set at some point in history for the few to benefit from the hoarding of power, to benefit from what we might call the advantage, keeping advantage amongst a few and reinforcing or perpetuating disadvantage for a larger group, thereby marginalizing this group, separating them from access to resources and otherwise power, right? And because of the intentional creation of these types of systems, over time, conditions have continued to be perpetuated despite the original intent. So until we undo what has been done, we can't expect a different set of results to come from our actions. We have to take a structural approach. When we talk about systems change, we want to reimagine our social systems and institutions in order to structurally reshape, reallocate, reorganize our resources in such a way that contributes to the kind of thriving that we all want to see. We can do this. I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful for a very specific set of reasons. Why? Because one, we've seen examples all over the place. You'll hear from some amazing colleagues from San Diego and Imperial counties today to tell us about some of the activities that are going on that give us hope for change in our local communities. Nationally, we've seen colleagues across foundations, within government, across a variety of public and private sector partnerships that have taken this moment that has been characterized by so much uncertainty and made decisions that some of us thought weren't even possible, including being able to do what I believe will be an amazing and meaningful conference virtually with a very little time to learn how to do this. Right? It hasn't been long since we all came together to do these in person. And now we've developed a level of proficiency based upon our flexibility, our creativity, to respond to the moment with a different level of focus and a different level of impact. And so because we've been able to respond to these uncertain times that have a global impact, then far be it to me to believe that we're not capable of revisiting the traditional practices of our sector, revisiting the dynamics of the current structure of nonprofits, and identifying, reimagining a new way of moving forward that keeps our collective humanity central to the experience. So specifically, I'll offer 3 things that I believe we can do within this region to thrive. One is we want to always pay attention to how power is flowing. Are we building power? Are we hoarding power? Are we sharing power? Are we wielding or imposing our power in ways that we haven't checked with our peers, our colleagues, our loved ones across nations and industries to determine whether there's alignment for the end goal of our work? We want to cultivate relationships based on trust, because as some of you may know, it's been said that change happens at the speed of trust. And I'll offer that progress happens at the pace of change. And so within relationship, we pace ourselves. There's a rhythm, just like if a dance partner, you get into a particular rhythm, you don't jump right in there, or else you're stepping on each other's toes, we're bumping elbows, you're going left, I'm going right. Instead, we want to establish a rhythm of harmony, right? That's how trust is built. And then over time, we get into that rhythm and we're able to move farther, faster, but sometimes we have to move slower in the beginning to get there. And so we want to check in with each other. And based upon these relationships of trust, then we can start to establish a shared vision for America's finest city. We can also establish a shared vision for this nation. And so to conclude, I'd like to just offer to each of you, especially as I reflect back on our experiences at Grantmakers for Effective Organizations, the broad membership base of institutions that comprise our membership, there's so much reason for hope. We, perhaps, if you're willing to consider this throughout the remainder of this time together as you listen to my colleagues, I invite you to consider that we may be the answers to the prevailing questions that characterize this moment. That the particular circumstances in this moment include the responses to these moments, the responses to these circumstances that reveal steps that we can take together if we tap into our collective genius for producing the kind of experience that's aligned across our organizations, our affiliations, or our identities. There's so much hope in the change that we've already been able to affect. And I invite you all to consider what else is possible, especially for our colleagues here, especially for our communities, especially for the people who live, love, and work in San Diego and Imperial counties. Thank you so much and enjoy the conference.
The title of this poem is called Now. It was inspired by the divine timing of life. Graduating from college made me question, what's your next step? Being a young father at 19. And so I had that question running through my mind. And this poem was healing for me. It was a way to express myself and share my story with the world. It's either now or never. The thought alone would often box me into broken pieces from insecurities bleeding. Now, my purpose splurges through my actions. Now, I'm driven to aim for excellence rather than running on satisfaction. Now, I set my goal backwards. I dream big and act second, think first and ask questions after. Whenever life throws me a ladder, I know I'm 100% eager to climb. I'm lion-hearted when it comes to success. My father taught me life is not checkers, it's more like chess. I tug my own heart sometimes, otherwise I'd be so content in my flesh. I never learned to make a move, I had to master the steps. I had to cry before I slowed down, controlling my breaths, finding a pulse within my home, knowing I'm strong but need help. See, owning that moment just felt like weakness, until the most confused transformed into the most genius. Until the unspoken became a light bulb for the secrets. Until the broken crown colored and realized its uniqueness. The struggles of life then formed the original thesis. For what's ahead, never would you have picked up the pieces. Peace is aligned with your purpose. Preach it. Peace is aligned with your purpose. Preach it.
My favorite part about living in San Diego is that it's home. It's always been home. I was born and raised here, and I love all the memories that I have when I drive by any part of San Diego. I love reliving them, and I built this connection to San Diego that I feel that I won't have with any other place that I end up living in. And it's something that's dear to my heart because I'm helping my community, people who look and, who come from different backgrounds like me.
When you describe San Diego, our region, what do you say? Do you talk about the surf, the weather, neighborhoods, the people? What is it about San Diego that shapes your story? Catalyst and its network of partners, friends, and funders worked together to ensure that San Diego's story and the public narrative is one rooted in truth and told with the voices of those closest to the issues. Now let's explore San Diego. Our vibrant, fascinating region is a shared region. Together, we're going to hear from transformational leaders who are inspired by this place we call home. We're going to the culturally rich and beautiful Southeast, and to indigenous farming land in North County, and to the border region, which serves as a vital and codependent economic engine for the region. We'll witness the military experience that defines life for many here, and the fields of Imperial Valley that help feed the nation. These are the stories of the southern border region. This coffee shop is rooted in equity and justice. It's fueled not just by the great coffee, but by 2 guaranteed income pilot projects and the leadership of 2 fearless San Diegans, Mother Cynthia Johnny and daughter Kia Pollard. As co-owners of Cafe X, their mission is to uplift communities of color. Here's what you need to know about Cafe X.
I'm Kia Pollard, CEO and co-owner of Cafe X, by any means necessary.
I'm Cynthia Johnny. I am co-owner of Cafe X, and my title in operations is Vice President and Chief Operating Officer.
Cafe X was created because of place. It only exists in relation to the neighborhood, the people, the imaginations and the hopes and dreams and the histories of these people, of our people.
Place was the reason for our work. To develop an area in our region that hadn't been developed. We had no Black-owned coffee shops. We are underrepresented in the coffee industry overall as Black women and Black people.
And I wanted to see a thriving Black community come back and activate spaces in that community. But since then, the vision has grown and it's become about generational wealth building for Black community in San Diego County.
What excites me most is the potential to really have people self-actualize and meet their dreams and goals.
The Black Women's Resilience Project is a project that's really close to my heart. It's one of those projects that came about kind of organically with community because we were approached about starting a giving circle for Black women. And we thought about this thing, and we thought for a pretty long time, but how can we really, in alignment with Cafe X and our mission and our vision and our values, work across sectors to make institutional change? And that's where the idea of guaranteed income, because we also believe in the redistribution of wealth and resources into communities that have been marginalized. So the fund went from Giving Circle to fund to project, because we then started doing focus groups within the community with Black women. Through those conversations, we learned there are so many obstacles and so many structures that need to be rethought and reimagined to really create a true safety net, and also a transition from safety net vulnerability, complete vulnerability, to self-actualization. So that's how it grew from a little seed, a little nugget with discussions in the community, and it blossomed into full-fledged partnerships with a lot of different organizations, and our advisory board of Black women that we created to provide some oversight and some direction and some guidance and some input as we're building this along with the community. So San Diego for Every Child came around maybe when we were about 3 to 4 months in planning our project, and we just really started to look at each other and say, both of us are doing guaranteed income programs and projects. I think it was a natural kind of leverage or leveraging point, and it made sense for us to collaborate and really pool our resources just to create greater regional impact. San Diego for Every Child Guaranteed Income Pilot focuses on families of color who have children under 12, and the sum is smaller, but the goal is to measure some of the same things. What do folks spend it on? You know, how are they interacting with their human service delivery models in this county? And collect that information, make a case, elevate narratives. I came on board actually with San Diego for Every Child not too long ago, 2 months ago, as the director to bring those two projects together and weave that fabric together in collaborative fashion so that we can use some of that infrastructure.
What inspires me most is our capacity for growth. We have some brilliant people in this community and in the population that we serve. Pure brilliance. How do we capsulate on that? How do we engage it? How do we make it visible for everybody to see? How do we really make them shine?
We are in it for long-term sustainable change. That's why we do Cafe X. That's why we had the vision for the cooperative coffee shop and the ownership model. And the things that we do require us to bring all of ourselves. We're all in. We're all in, literally.
Hello, I am Cynthia Johnny.
And I'm Kia Pollard.
And we are
Cafe X, by any means necessary.
Welcome. Wow, that video was really cool. I was just so touched. So we're just asked to do some follow-up to this video. And so I had a few questions that I thought might be great for us to answer and expound on our work at Cafe X. So one of the things when I think about guaranteed income, it's like, what is it? It seems to be another buzzword right now in our environment. So could you kind of explain to us what is guaranteed income? How does it work?
Yeah, guaranteed income and really universal basic income, it is a buzzword, but it's a buzzword with a lot of material impact. And it's actually part of a broader movement for equality, basic equality, and it starts with equity. and looking at communities that have been marginalized when we talk about guaranteed income. And this pilot in particular, the Black Women's Resilience Project, we're talking about leveling the playing field. And what these guaranteed income pilots do is provide that unrestricted cash to families, to individuals. There are different populations that are focus populations for all of the different kinds of pilots throughout the country. You have many throughout California. You've got some in Louisiana, you've got Mississippi, you've got New Mexico, and all of them are focused on providing this cash and really seeing what families do with it. And a lot of the outcomes have to do with people investing in themselves in a multitude of ways and examining the impact on their health, their family, their education, their savings, the ability to save, and plan for the future. So it's about, again, leveling the playing field and making sure that the folks who have historically not had the opportunity are provided that opportunity through cash.
Okay, well, that's cool. So next question would be for me.
Yes.
You say all that, it's
Yeah.
like, is anyone really investing that's in San Diego and Imperial counties in this kind of developing this guaranteed income project? And then, you know, the difference, I know, noted difference in the design that we've proposed as Cafe X in the community is having those wraparound services that we talked about. So we can go into that a little bit. But who is investing in it? Who are we looking at to be investors? When we talk about our all-in project, who's all in?
Yeah, who is all in? Yes. There are, and I mean, I think there are many different ways to kind of look at that and what contribution looks like, because sometimes it's not money. Sometimes it's thought partnership, sometimes it's space, sometimes it's simply elevating your voice and your mission and getting behind it and backing it. And so my role as director for San Diego for Every Child has been great because I came on to coordinate both pilots, as I mentioned in the video, and make sure that there is a nexus between the work of two organizations who are in community with each other. So we have funders on this side of the pilot, right? For San Diego for Every Child, Alliance Healthcare Foundation. The state has provided a large sum of money in appropriation for it. And Jewish Family Service is a core partner providing that other funding on the back end for this pilot. And not only are they doing that, but because San Diego for Every Child is connected closely in partnership with Jewish Family Service, we're leveraging their infrastructure for this project. And we came together, it's been a year now, it's been 9 months.
We've been talking about it.
It's been a long time in development and just figuring out what is appropriate, you know, because our pilot started with community, it started with focus groups and having the conversations. How do we bridge the gap between those larger organizations who do have the resources and the infrastructure and the connectivity to do so with smaller grassroots kind of emerging projects?
So I'm going to jump over that one question because that was mine, but that's okay. People, and when we say people, generally, when you think about business, sometimes they say you can't mix family and business into, you know, your work environment. That causes problems. But we're family, and we've created a co-op, and where everybody's in the business, even your dad is, you know, he jumps in wherever he can, which is great. So how do you think that works? What do you think the benefits of having that happen have been?
Of having family.
That's right.
Having family around. It's been wonderful, I think, largely. I'm not just saying that because you're here.
Of course not.
It has, because with family, and family that's really connected in a positive way, you have people who will have your back, that you trust, and they trust you. And there is just this level of comfort and safety that comes with that sort of a connection. And those are the kinds of things that are hard to build in community, because I think a lot of the times we have trouble establishing that baseline of connection and trust, especially when, you know, it's new organizations just meeting for the first time, or there are people with different work styles. Like, you know, I have a different work style than you, and vice versa. But with family, there's just a common denominator. We're in this. Yeah. You can't get rid of.
And we can have different work styles and still be okay.
Right. And it, you know, and we can work through that. And at the end of the day, we're together.
Yeah. So I totally agree. I think I'll just share one of the gains that I've had from being able to work with the family. I think about the intergenerational connection. You know, your millennial X and so forth. I think it's important to not only have those generations working together. It's important. You know, we have this vast experience. We're old, half a century, and then you all have all this energy still, you know. Try to match it. I can't always pony up, but it's okay. We all have our strengths, but I think that's an important part for not only us to work together, but for the community to see also, and people to observe that, you know, hey, that can be done. That can be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I can jump in?
You can do whatever you
and
want,
ask you a question. Yes. Because you're talking about the intergenerational piece, and it makes me think about many of the conversations that we have about community and the Black community specifically, and what it's looked like and transitioned to and transformed into over the years. And so I'm curious, what has been your experience of Black community and how it's grown, and what changes have happened over your lifetime that, you know, have implications today and into the future?
Yeah, well, there's a whole lot of that. As you know, both your grandparents, my father and mother, both grew up in San Diego. And so I had great aunts, grandmothers that were all in San Diego. Even they were here when the Coronado Bridge was built back in the 1930s or so. And Market Street, Imperial Avenue used to be aligned with Black businesses. There used to be a plethora of them, leaders in the community. And over the decades, and even we talk about 30 years back, a lot of those businesses were already gone 30 years ago. In the late 80s and early 90s, when you had the war on drugs and the, you know, the whole drug thing come into San Diego and other cities around the country, there was a mass exodus. And people in my generation, some of them sold their houses and they moved to places like Riverside County, Temecula, Menifee, Las Vegas, Texas, and other places. And you'll see a lot of them migrated there because, one, it got really expensive to live here. And then you had that element that came in the community, kind of broke things down, where you had generations of us whose mothers and grandmothers owned the homes. You got to that generation in that era, they literally end up selling and moving out or doing something different. So it kind of, I think it was a turnkey era for San Diego County and Black people and Black business. That's been my experience.
Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the things that we do at Cafe X, or try to do, and is our mission and our vision to do, is build that generational wealth and rebuild it. I'm curious, from your point of view, how we do that. And I'm wanting to know, really, how you think guaranteed income as part of the Black Women's Resilience Project ties into that overall vision and building up the Black community.
Okay, that is a very good question, because the Black Women's Resilience Project is more than just guaranteed income. As you know, we've designed it so that you have a series of wraparound services with community members that are entrepreneurs, business owners, or just want to be involved and be all in to really bringing up the efficacy, the power, self-actualization of Black women in a very specific way. So These wraparound services include things like financial literacy, entrepreneurship, if you just want to, job training and how to get a job. Those are the simple things. The finance is a big one. Mental health services, along with health and fitness, learning how to really take care of yourselves. You're not really much good to do any of this if you're not in good physical health. So it's what sets it apart from any of the other Income Pilot programs that I've seen. We've taken a holistic view of it. And I think all of that together and having that, what I call ultimately a spiritual component to it, and really caring about uplifting souls and making things better for people, is going to make a difference in building, because it really gives them the blueprint as to the how. Not just saying, here it is, and we'll send you somewhere to know. We're going to learn together, grow together, and advance together. So,
ooh, you said so many good things. I'm trying to keep track. Yeah, and I would just say to that, the guaranteed income piece of that is about establishing that baseline. I think I said baseline.
Yeah, that's the base.
Baseline, because beyond surviving, what else is possible?
Yeah.
And opening up those and actually establishing those networks of support that are really relevant to that individual. And not only is talking about some of those technical skills because they're needed, but how do you feel? How does it feel to be in your body? And how do you make meaning of your life as a Black woman in America, in San Diego? And where do we go from here? How do we build on that so that you have the fullest life possible? I think that's what we all want.
Yeah. You get that stressor off of you about how am I going to pay the rent next month, and how am I going to buy food? A lot more is possible, right? That's a real clincher. Yeah. So if we can overcome that first barrier and then have them deal with people that not have their same experience, that look like them, because a lot of time, social services are great, but they haven't worked effectively. And it feels like a lot of times someone coming down from somewhere out of nowhere, and everything is so personal, and and they don't really understand your life experience. So it brings another element, another way to really touch and connect with people.
And something else you said, I know I'll let you ask a question, but the blueprint, because it reminds me of something that we've discussed with one of our partners, San Diego for Every Child, and Jewish Family Service, about developing that blueprint as we work together, and what it looks like to have a blueprint that is at the foundation meant to create reciprocity between organizations that do have the influence and maybe the resources and the people to get things done, right? And what does it look like to work with smaller organizations in different sectors, and elevate those ideas and support it in a healthy way? Not take it over, remaster it, and then do it the way, redesign it, re-engineer a community idea. And I think that's what's really special about the partnership that we have, because we're actively working through those issues and talking about them openly.
I think it's unprecedented is what I think.
Definitely.
So when we look at philanthropy, and that's another thing, changing the narrative and how we actually discuss the how. I think one of the terms that we like to use is giving assistance. I like to use the word investment. Let's make this investment in our community, because it gives everyone involved a feeling that they're a part of this, rather than, I can give to, what is that little animal group, ASPCA or whatever they are. I can give to them all day. But if
ASPCA.
Yes, that group. I love animals. But you can give to something, to a cause from afar, and really kind of feel heartfelt and feel, well, that's all I can do. And you're thinking about, I'm just giving. I think there's a different feel when you say, I'm investing in this. And I'm taking an active part in making sure that it's a sustainable program, etc. So even in the grants that are probably going to come down the pike, I want to use that verbiage.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that whole spectrum is needed, right? I think right now we're heavily, and I think we're moving out of it, but that transactional culture of, you know, I have this money to give, this is how I want to give it, and here you go. Yeah. And I'm going to watch you, right? I'm going to pull the strings behind the scenes to one that's more participatory, collaborative, and really deeply engaged with the people who are at the end, you know, of that, and at the end of the service or the program or the project. Moving more towards that. I think we can still have some transactions, right? It's never all, you know, don't put your eggs in one basket kind of thing. You want to diversify the types of support, but I think there's not enough participatory support, like what you're speaking of.
Right, participatory, absolutely. So I can say that I think the future is bright. So is there anything else on this little sheet that you'd like to add?
You know, I think the last thing I want to touch on with you is how this work is different, because I think we got pieces of it, right? And we talked about the different modes of giving, and what people need to know too, about the work and the collaboration that we're a part of. What makes it different? What can funders take away? What can community members take away? People from all sectors take away about their contribution to what we're doing and what's needed in the future. Okay. We can both think about that and speak to that.
Yeah, it's wide, it's broad, but it can also be short. The short answer is take away that we are in it for the long term. This is something that we intend to be sustainable. Our intention is to uplift people in the community and bridge the gap between our organizations, nonprofit, for-profit, philanthropists, community, etc., and have them really understand who we are as humans, not just numbers for people who need help. And everyone doesn't fit that mold even in the work. When you think about guaranteed income and when you say assistance, which I want to say investment, you think about people who are absolute destitute. No, we have people with doctor's degrees that still need help, you know. So the takeaway is that we are all in. We are all in. And it's more about community development and the generational wealth building. I think it's our whole purpose in being.
Right. Yeah. And just, I think, you know, we've hit time, but to add to that, there's a lot of big picture problems. You know, I saw a statistic that said 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. We have almost 40% of children living in poverty in this county. And those things are easy to say, difficult to change, but it's possible. It's possible. And I think this all-in approach not only has to do with personally being all in, but being able to kind of break down that big picture to a really individual level and talk about it to people we may not have talked about it to before. We have to talk to our lending institutions. We have to talk to government. We have to talk to each other. So I think this is one step.
One step.
Self-determination is the first step. You know, give people what they need and support them in getting it, and stay in communication and collaboration. So,
yes, well said. X. All right.
San Diego is home to the largest concentration of military members in the world. As our region's largest employer, according to a recent study, 354,000 military-connected jobs accounted for 22% of all jobs in the region. But did you know that we're also home to the highest concentration of military children in the United States as well?
San Diego is home to the largest concentration of military members in the world. And actually, we're located right here in the highest concentration of military children in the United States as well. So the past 2 years of COVID-19 have been extremely challenging for the Armed Services YMCA, but a challenge that we stepped up to meet, as did many other nonprofits in the San Diego region. What we did here at this organization, we moved to clinical counseling online, we moved to an online education program, we moved to food distributions that were drive-through with only a 10-minute wait time, and families were guaranteed to get their food distribution, which was fantastic. And also we managed to actually implement childcare that was safe for our families so they can get back to work. One of the greatest challenges our military families face today is actually childcare, believe it or not. There's roughly 3,200 Navy children on the wait list, and that's just our Navy team, not our Marine Corps, our Coast Guard, and other branches of service. And in San Diego County, that number is roughly 270,000. And when I say childcare, I should say cost-effective childcare, and we need to get our families to work, help them be more sustainable, and you're going to do that through running high-quality, cost-effective childcare program. I served 8 years in the United States Marine Corps as an enlisted service member, a Marine out there, forward deployed. I remember what it's like to be, in the dark of the night behind actually a barrel of a gun and looking down range. And it really helped me remember what it was like to miss my son, understand the challenges and the lack of communication, and all the many things that we're going through as a military member and how that affected the families. We serve military families with all our programs and services, but also in those gray areas. Those are those areas where you don't specifically have a program or service for it, but it's an area where you're going to meet the needs of the military member, regardless of the rules you have as an organization. What inspires me most about the population that we serve is knowing their service and sacrifice to our great nation. And being here at the Armed Services Y, it's one way we can wrap our arms around the military member and their family and take care of those who serve our great nation and guard our legacy of freedom.
Hi, Tim. That was such an amazing video. Really great to learn a little bit more, and happy to have you with us here.
Well, your team did a fantastic job because it looked great.
They
it's
did.
true, but I think it's mostly on your team.
Yeah, no, thanks. So tell us a little bit more about the work that happens at the Armed Services YMCA.
Well, I like to joke and say it's my second best job, the first being that I was a Marine. And the work that we do there is just a lot of fun, but also very important work to support our military families at a time when they need it the most. We help basically provide programs and services to help strengthen the military family, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So who are the sort of people who show up at the Y?
We're going to have all sorts of folks that will attend our programs and services, but to your point, it's usually a junior enlisted. It's going to not necessarily be the E1s or the E2s. It's the E3 through E6, those who have families and kids that tend to struggle a bit more with military lifestyle and the challenges of military life.
So can you say a little bit more? Imagine I know nothing about the military life. You've got your
that's just it, right?
Yeah.
Because some people might say, hey, the military, you're guaranteed job, you're paid on the 1st and the 15th. I don't get it.
Yeah.
Like, what's the struggle? And oh, by the way, you live in San Diego. It's not bad, 72 degrees.
Right.
So the challenges in the military life will be the transition of moving from duty station to duty station, but also the high stress of the job. And a lot of times the military spouse is carrying all that burden on their shoulders. And it's often the case that if a military spouse has a challenge, they're not going to tell their spouse what's really going on. They have to handle it on their own, more like a single parent, if you will. And by the way, that will kind of segue us into childcare and the challenges around a single family income for our military families.
Yeah, childcare, like housing, has become one of the major affordability issues in the region. Childcare is something that the Armed Services YMCA provides, right? Are military families primarily going there for childcare? Are they looking at private childcare? What is the landscape?
Well, okay, so a couple things there. Childcare is really provided by the United States Navy and the Marine Corps team and Coast Guard teams, right, through Fleet and Family and their child development centers, right? Armed Services YMCA San Diego, Camp Pendleton, 29 Palms, we do provide forms of childcare, and it's something in San Diego we're going to do more of. But what's really true about this statement is that childcare as an issue, as you said, has been ongoing for a very, very long time, and not just for military families, but throughout the region of San Diego and across the country. It's something that we really need to solve and get down to brass tacks, because it's important to get everybody elevated and everybody back to either work or some form of education or anything they can do to improve their child's life and also have a successful life themselves.
So if I'm a military spouse, and if I understand, we're high 90%, we're talking about women who are in this spouse
That's correct,
role.
85%.
Yeah. Okay, so mostly women with small children, maybe teenagers. Where do I turn? If I am looking to put food on the table or find a job or whatnot, how, as a part of the military community, but kind of dropped in the middle of the much larger San Diego and Imperial County.
You're painting the right picture, actually. So I'll say that we could throw some age in there too, that the average age is somewhere in the 20s, right? So you come to San Diego, you're excited, you find out it's a very expensive town, and your spouse is now saying, oh, by the way, I'm leaving for a month. I just got here, and they don't know anyone. So a lot of times the spouses are leaning on each other for connections and connectivity, and also organizations like the Armed Services, YMCA, and some of the other great partners that are out there. And it is extremely challenging to be in a small, big town and get connected in the childcare. There's a lot of isolation that can happen, that sort of thing. So fortunately, there's programs and services out there at the Armed Services Y, but other great nonprofits and organizations. Lincoln Military Housing does a pretty good job as well to connect military spouses with each other.
And what are the sorts of programs that they're accessing? And we know about, CalFresh and Housing Commission, but are military families just sort of in line with everyone else to get their needs met, or are there special ways that they're?
I would say there's a lot of great programs out there. One in particular is we have one called Mom and Tots, actually, where the moms can come together and talk. And of course, you said earlier 15% are males, so we got to make sure we focus on both sides of that. We have our Horse of the Sun Ranch, where families really get connected as well, and programs like our Achievement Academy. There's another program Lincoln Military Housing runs called Stroller Strides, which is fantastic. But it's just anytime the families can get connected. We also do a military spouse symposium, which is fantastic, and that's another place where the families really get connected as well.
So what would I experience at the symposium? The
symposium is going to be everything from, believe it or not, cooking classes, art classes. We did a fashion show with Nordstrom's last year, or 2 years ago, which is fantastic. And then resume writing skills, all sorts of other things that are out there. And there are some military spouses who are extremely, I like to say they're extremely resilient. Any military spouse is a special person. They're extremely resilient. And some military spouses are very well connected, and you'll see them rise to the top, and they'll be very organized with all the military spouses to help pull them along. And our job at the Armed Services Y is provide programs and services that help that family connection, but also those gray areas. And the gray areas could be where we learn about a circumstance that doesn't match our programs or services. We reach out to our donors and make sure we handle that situation, which I think we're going to talk about. That's funny. I had some conversations with some spouses, and we were talking about this sort of question of being quote unquote unemployable because of this stigma or bias about, oh, well, you're just going to move on in 2 years. Or you constantly out to get your kids or do the this or the that, and wanting to really flip that coin, flip that narrative and say, that is not unreliability. That is resilience. That is adaptability. That's the absolute ability to deal with anything that comes on and do it with a smile on your face. Exactly. So, I mean, here you have the cost of childcare is roughly $1,000 per child. And so we all know the story of, well, gee, if I work, how much money will I earn versus the childcare sort of scenario. And for a long time, there was this trend, and it's a good trend, where all of our corporate partners were saying, gee, we want to hire transitioning service members. We'd like transitioning service members. Very trendy thing a few years ago, and it's a good trend to have, but the spouse was forgotten. It was like we forgot about the spouse. And the military spouses are so resilient. So what would it be like if we had childcare at the employer's location? And what would it be like if those military spouses could go and have an amazing job that they're working in and thriving? Because our goal is not to have families in food lines. Our goal is to have them out of the lines, right? We could certainly partner with many organizations and set up military food distributions all over San Diego. That's not a solution. Root cause. Actually, I call that wound worshiping. When you get so focused on the issue, you say, well, let's just do food lines everywhere, right? But that's not solving much. What you really need to solve is the root cause of what this is, which is training, education, employment, or whatever it looks like, something healthier to get these families out of the line and thriving, right? I like to say that nonprofits should try not to exist.
Right, yeah,
right?
Work ourselves out of a job, right?
Yeah, right, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So let me just ask this sort of obvious but maybe naive question of, we have entrusted ourselves to a vast military economy. San Diego's #1 economic driver, right, is the military. And these families have committed their lives, put themselves at great risk to serve in that capacity. Why is there any need within a military family? Why are we not, as a country, taking care of them?
It is the question of the day, and it's so easy for a nonprofit to say, hey, funders, we have food insecurity in the military, give us a grant and we're going to go ahead and solve that through food distributions. That's low-level thinking. It's more complex, and the Hunger Coalition says that food insecurity is an economic issue. It's way deeper and way vast. We've already talked about a little bit, is the mental mindset of a family, but also cooking classes, shopping for the right foods to take care of the family. It's easier just to go to fast food, which is expensive and unhealthy. So cooking classes on the list. Financial literacy is another factor. Cost-effective childcare, and really helping that family thrive. It's multifaceted. So it's easy to say food is the issue, but again, hunger doesn't discriminate, doesn't care who you are. But we need to solve that issue at a deeper level. When it comes to the military itself, we find that we've done economic studies. The military actually pays decent as far as livable wages is concerned. So I don't believe it's a pay issue with the DoD per se. However, it's, as I said, it's a complex issue where we can address collectively. And one of the areas where the nonprofits, we like to say it, we talk about collaboration. Sometimes it's a buzzword, but it's an area where we can do better.
What would you do? I know a couple, 2-3 years ago, there was an effort to sort of map the 100 or so military-connected nonprofits in the region.
Almost feel like it's 1,500, you know, the nonprofits that are connected. And I really feel that, I do remember that process and the mapping. It's a great effort. We have to have follow through, right? And I think the way you do that is where the rubber meets the road, maybe 1 or 2 partners at a time. So start small. We have Navy Marine Corps Relief is a good partner of ours. Support the Enlisted Project, maybe another great partner. San Diego Food Bank, Feeding San Diego. So we can all collectively come together and just start small, you know, and start building those real collaborations that where the rubber meets the road, which I think our food distribution is doing. It's more than a distribution. We call it distribution with dignity. And it's got multiple resources for families to participate in and engage with. So we call it a gateway to the other programs and services, so they can find some other solutions they may need.
Yeah. How often are people coming back? Do you have sort of a consistent group of folks who are engaging, or is it sort of one-off, or are you able to get them along a spectrum of
so let me just say this, that pre-COVID, we had about 220 families going through our food distribution, and we're running 2 different locations. During COVID, that number increased to about 1,600 families. And then it actually increased higher than that because we're serving the meals, the lunches through Feeding San Diego. And now we're seeing it taper off, so to speak. So we're about roughly 600-700 families are coming through the food distribution itself. But I smiled a little bit because our families are just that. To Armed Services Wide, they're literally connected to us. They trust us, and we have just a fantastic relationship with so many of them on so many different levels. Because, you know, when we talk about things like childcare as a general term, it doesn't sound very humanistic. When I think of the Achievement Academy, I think of the young military child. I don't even know if I should be sitting here, honestly. I was, you know, in a military family myself. And then I went in as an enlisted Marine, and I struggled tremendously when I got out of the military, sleeping on my neighbor's floor for 6 months, really challenged, transferring $5 so I could take $20 out of the ATM, those sort of things.
What helped you get to where you are today?
Well, I'll say first and foremost, God, and then also perseverance and a little bit of luck and education. It was a huge challenge. I was a single father for many years, and this is just like what our military. This is why I love my role. We say titles like executive director and all this other stuff. The reality is, I was a junior enlisted who made who ended up as a single father, transitioning out of the military. By the way, super confident. I'm a Marine. I can do anything. Yeah. And then I get out and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a little more challenging than I thought. So, anyways. I think that's one of the helpful things for the position is I can see through the eyes, at least as a military member, but not as a military spouse. And what we can do is work collectively with all our partners to help solve those issues. But it's more than just buzzwords like childcare and food insecurity and all that stuff. We really need to focus on making a meaningful impact on the individuals we serve at the individual level, and then taking those measurements and elevating them. I think and when you're a nonprofit professional, you don't just go to your job every day. You want to go to sleep at night and then wake up charged up to know that you'll make a meaningful difference the next day and every single day for that matter. So to me, it's a question of how do we elevate that family? How do we change that child's life? How do we inspire them? And then showcasing that so we can do more of it, right? Through our partners too.
Yeah, you've talked about collaboration a couple of times. What is that sort of secret sauce, right? Catalyst is a network of funders. That is what we do. We seek to build community and connections and collaborations. Yeah. How does that look in your work?
So first off, if it's going to be a clean collaboration, it should be done without the sort of thought of, gee, if we collaborate, we'll get more funding. That's not the right way to approach it. It should start where the rubber meets the road, where the two organizations come together and say, you know what, you are peanut butter, I'm jelly. I think we could get together here. And they do something really great and really cool. And if you showcase, if you focus on having amazing programs with high impact, then the donors, the funders will realize that and they'll come. And you have something to really showcase. That's what you should focus on, is the life-changing impact. And I think that's the secret sauce, is having an authentic partner that's not focused on the dollars. They're focused on the impact for the people you serve.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that's most interesting that we've talked about in your approach is this idea that we're set up to do a certain thing, but we work with families who have complex lives. And there are rules in place, but we can't let rules define us, I think. Sure. Can you say a little bit about how that works?
So, okay, I'm going to start with food insecurity as a piece, or let's just talk about dollars, okay? It's a scary thing to be hungry, okay? There are several times and several occasions when military members have driven 15, 20 miles, 20 minutes, low on fuel, and then be turned away and say, we can't serve you because you're an E6. Yeah. Something of this nature. Well, now, can you imagine how much courage it takes to muster? You can, I'm sure. It takes a lot of courage to come up and say, I'm going to drive somewhere, and I'm going to humbly say, I need help, and thought I could get help there. Now I've just wasted all that gas, that time, that stress. And we know people under duress are short-term thinkers. They're just thinking, what do I do next, right, sort of thing. So when a nonprofit turns someone away based on a rule they have, you need to think of it from a humanistic standpoint. It's just a human being there and they need help. And that's your goal, that's your mission. Set aside those rules. Don't pay attention to it. You got to take care of the person right there in front of you. If you trust the process or you trust in God, then they're standing right there in front of you. Just handle it now. And I've even seen it in my organization. When I first got there, we had this thing that we'll give you support. And then we read this thing to them and said, oh, and by the way, you can't come back for 6 months. Sort of rule. And I said, can I see that for a second? Yeah. Tear that thing up, right? Done with it. And I had a military spouse walk into our offices very humbly, and you could tell she had some stuff going on. And this is where we broke our rules, of course. Her husband was an E7 on deployment. Her daughter just had brain surgery at Navy Medical Center. Wow. And the doctor said, you should get a new mattress for your daughter's recovery. So what did she do? She sold their queen size mattress to buy a twin. The twin had mold inside of it. It was a used mattress. The reason she did that is so she could get some food, right? She was turned away by 2 nonprofits, okay? And came in, and this is not patting ourselves on the back, just so we're clear, but she came into the Armed Services Y, no questions asked. We assisted her. We called one of our donors. Can I say who it was?
Sure.
I think I can. Jerome's Furniture. And Jerome's, within an hour, said, we got this. How many mattresses, how many linens, all that stuff. And off they went and took care of that family. And serendipitously, her son, who had autism, needed a bike to get to school. And wouldn't you know it, a donor walked in when she was there and said, and he says, I have a brand new bike in my car. Does anyone need it?
Oh my
Fit
goodness.
that kid, got him a bike, and off they went.
Amazing.
And we stayed in touch with the family too. But this is that gray area. It's not one of our programs or services, but it's someone who came to us in need. And there's no rules. This is a human being you're dealing with. So just do that and let that be part of your process.
One of the most empowering, motivating things that I experienced over the last couple of years from the vantage point of working with funders is seeing them break their own rules, recognizing that in the time of COVID, with so many people suddenly being food insecure, housing insecure, losing their jobs, there are a lot of rules to philanthropy. We've created a vast system that tells us when and how to fund and what's required in exchange. There's not, we are working towards a world in which trust-based philanthropy is sort of the coin of the realm. And we saw that come to life during COVID. I wonder if you experienced that, and or what would you say to funders? You know, here are some rules that are actually making it harder for us to work together towards the mission that we share.
You know, I love when a funder comes to meet with us personally. And I love also when they're connected to other funders who trust them. And they have a real conversation with us about our needs and the needs of our constituents. And we can have that dialogue. And the funding comes in a way where they trust us, where they're basically going to say, Tim and company, do with these dollars what you need to be, what needs to be done, as opposed to how many numbers will you serve. Because what you focus on, if you're going to make it a numbers game, all of a sudden we're thinking, oh well, we don't have good numbers. Let's get good numbers so we get our next funding round, right? Sort of thing. I really think it should be focused on. Obviously, you have to have numbers as a measurement, but it should really be focused on the impact of those of who you're serving.
Beautiful.
More specifically, right? So I love the donor when they come in and say, here's X amount of dollars and use it for your highest and best need. We trust you as an organization, and you know it allows us to serve in a way where we don't have we're not trying to follow measurements, matrices, so to speak.
Yeah, go for impact. I love
right?
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. This has been so fun. We've learned a lot, and I look forward to continuing.
I'm so happy I get to be part of it. So thanks so much. Yeah.
The Imperial Valley spans across Imperial and Riverside counties in Southern California, with El Centro serving as the urban center. The valley is flanked by the Colorado River in the east and the Salton Sea in the west. The Imperial Valley is often considered one region, but really, it's made up of towns, places, and communities, each with a unique identity. The opportunities and issues facing the Imperial Valley don't just impact those who live in the region, but our entire nation.
My name is Roque Barros. Some people call me Rocky. I'm the executive director of the Imperial Valley Wellness Foundation. The Imperial County is unique in its own way. A lot of people don't know that about the Imperial County. Sometimes they just refer to as the Imperial County as a homogeneous group of towns and people, and it's not that way at all. But the Imperial County, being that we're tucked away, you know, on the border, next to the Yuma-Arizona border and so forth, people forget about that. A lot of people, you know, tell me they drive from San Diego to Yuma or to Phoenix and don't even realize that they're going through the Imperial County. Of all of the water that comes to California, the Imperial County receives 70% of that water. And it's also, because of that and because of its workforce, in agriculture, we produce $2 billion of ag annually in the Imperial Valley. And so in the winter, we are providing about 2/3 of all of the vegetables for the United States. Place is at the core and the heart of everything that I do. I grew up in the Imperial Valley, and as a kid, you know, I swam in the Salton Sea, I fished, I learned to water ski. I mean, I loved it. You know, it was a recreational area. There's a lot of stuff happening there. And now, unfortunately, you know, it's drying up and it's a toxic seabed, and there's a lot of issues associated with that. I was born and raised there, small town of Calipatria. I tell people, you know, that's really where, you know, I started my community building journey. Some of these smaller towns, they're looking for more voice and visibility at the decision-making tables. They're not there, they're not connected. One of the most important lessons that I've learned is to listen and learn, right? And to wait for those opportunities, not to come in with like my own agenda or our own agendas, And so when we're all in, we have to be willing to take risk. We have to be able to stay there for the long haul. Sometimes we go, well, look, you know, I got to get this done and we got to get it done by this deadline or whatever. No, we need to honor the pace of the community, and we need to start with where they're at and what they need right now. I would say another important lesson is have fun doing this work. Like, I've been doing this work for many years, and I have fun doing it every single day. And if I didn't, I wouldn't do it anymore. Well, it's good to be here with you, Bobby. Bobby Brock, for the audience. Bobby Brock is with the Imperial Valley Community Foundation. And Bobby, you know, I think we should just start like from the beginning. So why don't you tell me and the audience a little bit about yourself growing up in the Imperial Valley and what it means for you to be there now professionally in this funding role.
Yeah, no, I'm a fourth generation Valley resident. I was born back on the East Coast when my dad was working with the government, and then came back when I was about 1.5 years old, but grew up in El Centro in a predominantly farming family. You know, and just ended up going to school at San Diego State and took a job with the Boy Scouts after graduation. Moved back to the Valley as a local executive, serving Imperial County in San Diego, and then just, you know, transitioned through a few different you know, jobs with the financial services industry, and wound up as a volunteer with the community foundations. We were revitalizing that around 2007-8, and came on, you know, per request, and I guess applied. Yes, I did apply. It wasn't given to me to be the president CEO back in March of 2008. So, you know, it was something I believed in as a volunteer and felt was, you know, important enough personally to go ahead and make that change full time, to really dedicate some of my passion for the opportunities and the community. You know, and I've been doing that for the last, you know, 13 years or so. So it's been good. It was real easy to go back and plant roots. I couldn't farm because I killed too many palm trees growing up, but planting roots in the community service you know, realm was something that was close to me. How about you?
Well, you know, I do have one question though before we move on to me. Could you say a little bit more about, you know, what it's like growing up in a farming family?
Yeah,
I mean, you have to get up early every day, all these chores, the heat in the summer.
Oh, I had chores and the hay fever and the heat blisters from working in, you know, diesel parts and everything, and of course, you know, loading the trucks, you know, with the forklift, and just, you know, being around that environment of you know, of agriculture, you know, taught a lot of, you know, it taught me respect, you know, and appreciation for people just from all walks of life, and to give value and respect everybody, and that there's a lot of joy, you know, no matter what the job was. And I just always appreciated that, even if we couldn't communicate. And I think now too, that's something that I've learned to see more often is, you know, language isn't you know, it's not necessarily a barrier to progress and development. You know, it's just one avenue that we use to communicate and engage with people. You know, so if we build those skills, then we can do more of it. But otherwise, it's not the only roadblock. It's just, you know, perhaps a temporary obstacle that we have to get through or struggle with, and sometimes the fun comes along with that. You know, botching a language respectfully, but I think the agriculture, of course, you know, yeah, it was eye-opening again in some ways to the hard work and dedication of people and their talents, you know, as well as you know, the beauty of the area, you know, sincere appreciation.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing more about that. I mean, I didn't grow up in a farming family, but I grew up in Calipatria. It was all, of course, surrounded by agriculture. I loved it. There was a small town. You know, when I was there, it was about 3,500 people. Everybody knew everybody, and everybody knew my dad because he was a city council member and he was a mayor of the town. And the worst part about it is that sometimes I'd be pulled over by a police officer to tell me that my mom and my dad wanted me to go home. And I was always hoping that they were pulling me over for a ticket. I said, I hope you don't embarrass me in front of my friends that my mom and my dad want me home. But so it was a great place. You know, I really loved it there. And You know, and then, you know, as you mentioned, you know, because of my education and my career, I went off. I left the Valley, even though, like I said, as a kid, I loved it there. Just really enjoyed, you know, all the different things that you can do there. Then went to college, and my career expanded all over the place, and came back. And now I'm glad to be back. And it's really interesting because, you know, I think about, I have my niece, her daughter wrote a report on me, and we've never met. She lives in Idaho, but, you know, she's really young and never met. And when she shared the report with me, I was totally surprised. And I kind of feel that way about the Imperial County now coming back, because as a kid, I thought of the Imperial Valley a certain way. And now as an adult, a whole different way, thinking about, you know, economically, how it's doing, the industry that's there, and so forth. And also now working with these future leaders of the Imperial County. So as a funder and meeting, you know, all these nonprofit professionals and these organizations and the great work that they're doing, I'm just totally amazed and excited too, though, that, you know, just about everybody that I meet with, it's probably yourself, you know, is there, either I know them or they're connected to somebody that I know, and there's only one degree of separation. Right. And so it makes it really nice because, you know, there's these relationships that were built, maybe not just by myself, but even, you know, with my parents or my siblings, but I can still turn to those folks, and it's as if they know me. And so that feels good about being back in the Imperial Valley.
Yeah, no cops are pulling you over either.
Yeah, no, I don't want them to pull me over now, because now they'd probably pull me over for a ticket. But.
We're not editing anything, are we?
No, I mean, you know, so you know, when you think about the Imperial County now as sort of a vibrant contributor in our greater region, right? Because as kids, we didn't think much about the Imperial Valley as this, you know, vibrant contributor to the region. What do you think about the Valley now? What do you tell people about it?
Well, I think a lot of times we sell ourselves short. You know, there's a lot of opportunity, you know, and need to develop more civic pride and you know, I don't want to say buy-in, but belief in what the region has to offer, and the industries that are successful, and whether that, you know, is agriculture or you know, even medicine through nursing and some of the different public safety and fire safety programs, the law enforcement presence, the government jobs with the prisons and you know, Homeland Security, you know, as examples. You know, those are all stable industries, but there's a lot more that can be enhanced behind that, and we're seeing that with higher education and of course, you know, the regional opportunities, not just you know, with San Diego and Coachella Valley, but also across the border with Mexicali and down into Baja. So yeah, that mindset has shifted, as opposed to, you know, what are we going to do this weekend, as opposed to what can we do to make a difference in the long term. So I think there's tremendous partners, you know, that we look at and trying to, you know, build up some of those as we identify them. You know, so when you say what, you know, for funders and some of the collaboration, you know, I think those opportunities are ripe, you know, because there's so many different, you know, areas that, you know, could be used as a focus for pilot programs, as well as, you know, those that we have some real studs out there that have been doing great work that with a little bit more help could do even more and build out some models that could be replicated in other parts of the country or scaled up locally. You know, you come back into town, I mean, based on your experience, you know, in San Diego with, you know, projects here in Oregon and other rural communities, I mean, what are you seeing, you know, as similar opportunities, or you know, what comes to mind now that you're back on the scene?
Well, you know, I mean, there's a lot of unique opportunities. And so one of the things that I do in doing this type of work, as well as I'm sure you do, is I always tell people, you know, I listen a lot, right? I listen to learn and then look for those opportunities. And one of the things that I've noticed is, you know, there are some communities and some community groups that don't have much of a voice or visibility. Right. And they're looking for that, right? And so, and with that comes these opportunities, right? I was just meeting with some folks in the town of Niland recently, and they talked about, you know, back in, I don't remember, the 60s or 70s, their parents all grew tomatoes, right? And then the tomato industry turned, and so now they're no longer able to grow tomatoes there in Niland, but yet the property has sat there, the land has sat there empty for many years. And so I look at, wow, what are these opportunities? These folks that, you know, grew up with me. They were my age, as kids, we grew up together, and now they're adults that have this land that's been transferred over to them, but they're not doing anything with that land. And so for me, that's a huge opportunity there, right? That I hope that we can look at, you know, are they able to grow other vegetables on that land, right? Are they able to take opportunities with, you know, some of the solar, opportunities there as well, or investments. And also I think about, you know, ownership, right? Because there's one thing, I talk a lot about, you know, the difference between engagement and ownership, and especially economic ownership. Are there economic opportunities for folks to actually invest in some of these, you know, whether it's the renewable energy sources and so forth? Recently, I took a tour of the geothermal plants, and again, it's amazing, right? And are there opportunities though for people here in the Imperial Valley to invest in those, to be part owners in some of those? So those are some of the things that I'm looking at right now, and I hope to see in the future.
I think, and what you said reminds me of that saying. You know, Stephen Covey said it, and others have said it before him. But, you know, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think we've seen a lot of our communities that have been hurting or felt underheard, that might be under-resourced, underprivileged, underserved, or just underutilized and underappreciated. So I think you coming in and you know, wanting to engage and speak with people, you know, is something that just adds a lot of, it humanizes things. You know, where you treat people as equals, and you want to hear what they have to say, because it has value. And I think that we have so many folks, even especially in our smaller communities too, that just haven't had a chance to be at that forefront or have a seat at the table, to be a contributing member, as opposed to just, you know, someone that's trying to stir the pot, or that, you know, we don't know where they're coming from. And I think that there's a lot of, you know, healing that comes through that conversation, to try and understand others before we go in and fix their problems, because we don't know what the problems are. And you know, how do we, you know, not sell ourselves, but share, you know, what we have to offer, and find some of those commonalities in terms of, you know, how we can support each other. So I appreciate your experience and mindset coming in, and of course, you know, I think the question is there. I'll just share that, you know, I appreciate the Ivy Wellness Foundation and your experience, because I followed your work, and I've mentioned this to you before, you know, through your brother Bob, and his bragging about you and all the good stuff that you've done over the years. So now to have you back in the Valley, you know, implementing some of those same strategies and techniques, and just the community building and engagement processes, you know, is really exciting. And of course, too, to build Ivy Wellness as a funder that, you know, I think is someone that is also, you know, in addition to the community foundation, you know, focused on the well-being of the entire community, that has your strengths and attention given specifically to health and wellness, you know, are, you know, just critical components of that well-being. And for the community foundation, it's a little bit more broad, because, you know, we're somewhat relegated to, you know, what the donors come to us with and their interests, you know, so just to have that other piece of the puzzle plugged in is something that I don't want to say we don't worry about, but that we can leverage, you know, and make introductions to. And, you know, you remind me that there shouldn't be a fear of relationships and ownership, you know, over Rolodex, you know, that in order to really grow the community. And I think we're going to see more of that. Is just the introductory, the piece of introductions and you know, connecting people. And now too, as we start talking about some of the regional opportunities in terms of bringing funders in to visit the Valley and partner with us, you know, is something that I'm excited about. And I think you're definitely the right person to have on the scene to help, you know, push some of that forward, along with the support from Catalyst and, you know, other folks.
Yeah, I'll add to that, because I think, you know, one of the things when people ask me, you know, what's one of the highlights that you have now that you've been, you know, doing this position with the Wellness Foundation, I said, working with Bobby Brock at the Imperial Valley Community Foundation. So I'm really excited that we've had the opportunity, you know, to connect and to start talking about some of this work. And I'm really looking forward to what that might look like in the future. And I know that, you know, Catalyst has been a part of those conversations as we start thinking about how do we attract more resources and more funders to the Imperial Valley, right? And so we started to talk about this rural funders network and what that might look like. And so I'm really excited about that piece of work. And also I think that it's an opportune time because right now there's a lot of national attention and focus on rural communities, right? And the exciting thing is, you know, like 1 out of every 5 people in the United States live in a rural community, right? And so it's about 60 million people or something like that. And that's really exciting that we're part of that. And I think it's the type of attention that we're receiving, I think can be really beneficial for the Imperial Valley and for philanthropy because, you know, again, in rural America, philanthropy, there's about 6% of philanthropic dollars in rural America. And we definitely need to bring that up somewhat. And so I'm really looking forward to working together with you, Bobby, and with Megan at Catalyst in promoting our region as a very critical, I think, and rural area for the country. It already is with agriculture and with renewable energy resources.
You know, Rocky, I think a lot of times, that you know, Imperial County is kind of often looked at and sometimes make that appeal that we're out there looking for help and that we don't have a lot to contribute and offer. And even though there might be, you know, individuals that have wealth, you know, and are engaged as volunteers and you know, leadership with different organizations. You know, what do you see that Imperial Valley has to offer, even to San Diego? You know, because I know that we have, I'll just use the term, you know, players, you know, and key stakeholders that do represent not only Imperial Valley, but also statewide projects and national and international initiatives. But they're from Imperial County. And now too, as we look to build more collaboration with partners out of San Diego, you know, what do you see is Imperial Valley residents and organizations, you know, bringing to the table?
Well, you know, first of all, I tell people the Imperial Valley and San Diego County, they're like brothers and sisters, right? I mean, we all have family, you know, we have family that lives in the Imperial Valley, we have family that lives in San Diego. And so I always tell people the freeway goes in both directions. There's a lot to offer that we have to offer in each. I mean, I drive down the freeways because I go back and forth to San Diego and Imperial County, you know, at least once a week because that's how much is going on between our two areas. And then I see traffic going, you know, both ways. You know, recreation is huge here in the Imperial Valley, as you know. The places, the Imperial Valley is packed with people here. We love it, and in the winter they come here to stay here as well. And so I really love that. And so hopefully, though, there's more opportunities because I know right now we talk a lot about the opportunities around renewable energy sources, agriculture. There's probably a lot more opportunities, you know, around tourism. Because we have, you know, in the holidays, you know, or, you know, my son rides a dirt bike and I do too. And, you know, you go out there and it's packed on the weekends or during holidays with all these recreational vehicles. But anyway, so we have some amazing folks, you know, the County of Imperial, our public health department, you know, Tony Rejudas and Esperanza Colio with the County of Imperial. Wonderful people, and they call Esperanza the rainmaker because she brings funding from all over the place to the Imperial County. And so there's a lot for folks to learn about how, you know, one thing about the Imperial County is that we're resilient and we're resourceful. And I think that is really critical when you talk about how places, you know, can move forward and advance. It's a lot has to do with the resiliency and resources.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot of willingness, like you said, that, you know, along with resiliency is the willingness to participate and make the trip and be at the table, you know, and that, you know, to go visit family in Mexicali, I mean, you're looking at a 2-hour ride, you know, to come back home, to go, you know, 3 or 4 miles, you know, so driving 2 hours to participate in a meeting in San Diego or to show up at an event, you know, and have a seat at the table is really no big deal, at least in some of the circles that I run in. And I think that, you know, we see the value in that because we want folks to know that we're committed.
Right. And, you know, Bobby, one of the things I know we're close to our time, but I think one of the things that's really important to me is that I think that just anywhere people have an opportunity to be, well, I feel, first of all, that we talk a lot about community building. And, you know, for me, community building is about working together to make things better. And I believe everybody has an opportunity to be a community builder. And I just love to get a shout out there to the people of the Imperial County, because there are some amazing community builders out there. There are people out there that are very passionate about the county, that have lived here, you know, all their life, and others that moved here recently, but they really care about the Imperial County. And that's the one thing about, you know, anywhere you go in the Imperial County, people are cordial to you. They say hello. They're welcoming, and so that's really what I love about this area here are the people of the Imperial County.
I might have to travel with you more. I don't get all the hellos and whistles anymore. But yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. It's a different pace of life, but it doesn't mean that it's slow. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of opportunities, and now too the focus on redeveloping the curriculum for higher education, vocational, technical schools. Hopefully, we'll see new industries come out there to prevent some of that talent and brain drain that we've seen, and people gone to San Diego and other places and done very well, but there's a lot of that same talent that we'd like to retain in the valley, and those are not just bright minds but also generous hearts, and then too to give credit to the people that have stayed and give back no matter what their financial position is or their experience in volunteering. So I think the door is wide open.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the last things I'll say that's really important for us is when we think about equity. I think addressing equity nationally requires investments in rural America, and I hope to see a lot more investments in rural America, and especially in the Imperial Valley.
Home to the busiest border crossing in the Western Hemisphere, San Ysidro's local economy relies on tourism to fuel more than 700 businesses. With 83% of residents identifying as Hispanic, San Ysidro embodies our binational region. You may know it for the border, but what does that mean for its local economy?
What people may not know is that San Ysidro is not actually a city. We're a community of San Diego. We often say the forgotten part of San Diego, but we're part of the city of San Diego. Most of the decisions that affect San Ysidro are actually federal decisions, right, because of the border. And that's the biggest thing we've experienced these last 18 months is that, quite frankly, border communities, and I'm talking from San Ysidro to Brownsville, Texas, don't really have representation in Washington. Back when life was easy, our biggest complaint before COVID was border wait times, right? How fast somebody could get across the border to visit us. Now it's their inability to come visit us. Right now, the only people that can cross the border on land are U.S. citizens and permanent legal residents. What that's leaving out are the tourist visa holders, who, for San Ysidro Boulevard, that's 95% of their clientele. As a matter of fact, we've just reached the $1.1 billion lost sales mark. Place is a multifaceted term for us. Place, we're at the busiest land border crossing. Place, we're part of San Diego, yet separated from the rest of San Diego. Place, we're a small community of 35,000 residents, but have 100,000 people at any given time in our community, with folks transiting and so forth. Place, we're the busiest point on the trolley system, yet we're the last one to get the new cars and the new routes and everything else. So place affects us in everything we do. We're also the place where you can do wonderful shopping at wholesale prices, and then 15 minutes crossing the border, you're eating the most fabulous food you can find in the Western Hemisphere. So there's a lot of good with the challenges as well. What inspires me most about the population in San Ysidro is that we're simple people. For us, it's 1 and 1 is 2, and if we got an idea and we've got a desire to do it, let's just do it. Yet we understand the complexity of everything that affects us. Even the businesses here that for the last 18 months have been only able to operate at 25%. If you go talk to them and you say, okay, if the restrictions are lifted prior to this holiday season, how will you be? We're going to be fine. We can work through this. It's that resiliency, even though they've just had 18 months of lost sales. That's what really, it keeps me going every day. It influences me most, enlightens me most, makes me most proud is our people, the resilience of our people, and the fact that we know we can work through anything.
Well, hi, Jason. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Yeah, that was a really great video. I think it probably gave some good perspective to folks about what really goes on at the border. It's not just a place to pass through on your way somewhere else.
There's actually a community there.
Turns out, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about San Ysidro. Who is that community?
So, as I said in the video, it's an interesting dichotomy because we have 35,000 people that are actually residents there, largely Hispanic, I think somewhere in the 85 percentile. We do have a lot of other ethnic groups based on the military being in the area, and San Ysidro being one of those few affordable living places left. But like I said, 35,000 residents. But at any given time, you got 100,000 people. We've got about 100 in normal times, about 156,000 people cross the border every day in San Ysidro. You can think of it in terms of, looking northbound and southbound, it's over 300,000. That's like the city of Chula Vista picking up and moving every day.
Yeah, and it is the busiest land border crossing in the world, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So what is it that's moving across the border? What are people doing when they're traveling that way?
Well, we've still maintained 100,000 people crossing between Baja and California. So it's the 3 San Diego crossings throughout the pandemic. So a lot of them are either expats or U.S. citizens living in Tijuana or Baja California and working up in San Diego. Now, what San Ysidro has suffered was the other 40,000 or so that are tourist visas that haven't been allowed to cross in the last 19 months. So you've got our border. It's one of the few crossings, or the only crossing, I think, the U.S. southern border. You can actually walk from an American house to a Mexican house. There's no desert or river or anything between us. So that creates a different dynamic of those crossers. Like I said, everybody's from visiting family to going to school to going to work to shopping, etc.
Yeah, I remember as a kid going across just for an afternoon.
I can't tell you how many people give me the story of being in San Ysidro waiting for Grandpa to cross, on a Sunday or something like that. So that's what makes us unique.
Yeah. So the pandemic has disrupted, and other government decision-making factors have disrupted not just business but families' lives.
Oh, absolutely. Our lives, our binational lives, absolutely.
Yeah. So 35,000 residents. 1,000 businesses? Tell me about the business.
Yeah, so we have about 736, to be exact.
Give or take.
Depending on the month, businesses that are certificated in what is San Ysidro. The chamber has another 100 members or so, those that are interested in border crossing issues. But yeah, in the zip code of San Ysidro, there's about 736 businesses.
And how have they fared?
Well, initially, I would say in the first 4 months of the border restrictions, we lost about 236 of those businesses.
So a third of them.
Yeah, just immediately. In the first 3 months, those businesses that were able to operate were only operating at about 24%, of their normal sales, etc. In San Ysidro, we have sales in the neighborhood of 895 million every year.
Wow.
And so in normal times, obviously. So during the pandemic's 19 months, we lost 1.3 billion. That's with a B.
Wow. And what's the impact of that? And does the repercussions extend beyond the San Ysidro boundary?
Absolutely. Those numbers that I have are just for San Ysidro. But you can go up to Fashion Valley and talk to a store manager, at the mall, and they'll tell you the market, the visual decrease in customers they have, because of those border restrictions. Unfortunately, there's not a border authority or a group that is actually monitoring all of those numbers throughout San Diego County or throughout California. But the best I can do is, give you San Ysidro's numbers.
Yeah, no, that's really impactful. And you said there are members of the San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce that aren't located in San Ysidro. Why would a business from somewhere else care what happens?
Well, sure. Let's say you're Anheuser-Busch. You're not in San Ysidro, but you provide to our restaurants. It's businesses like that. You're Sequan Casino, right? You're not in San Ysidro, but you'd love for some of our members, those people crossing the border to get out to the casino and have fun out there. So it's like banks, of course, they aren't located necessarily in San Ysidro, but want some of that business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that the city of San Diego cares what happens in San Ysidro, since it's a community of the city of San Diego, although I don't know how many people would actually realize that.
Yeah, it's gerrymandering at its finest. There's about 18 inches of land, most of it underwater, along the west side of the 5 that connects us geographically. But yes, we are a community of San Ysidro, community of San Diego. Yes, what we do obviously impacts the city of San Diego. I mean, like I said, you can't have $1.3 billion in lost sales and not have that effect be felt throughout the county.
Yeah, so how hard or easy is it for you to set policies and make changes to the benefit of the community and the businesses there, given that you're part of this bigger infrastructure of the city, not to mention everything that happens on the border with the federal government?
Well, and that's what I was going to say. You know, regardless of what's happening locally, at the end of the day, the people's ability to visit us is a federal decision. And, you know, for the past 19 months, we've seen that border communities have no representation in Washington. And that's not, you know, based on any particular congressman or senator. I'm saying in general, border communities, you know, just don't have a voice in Washington. So one of the proposals of my old military days, when something goes wrong, you show how it's never going to happen again. So one of the plans that we have, or what we're doing to make this, or to ensure this doesn't happen again, there's a group called the Border Mayors Conference. Okay. And so it's obviously all of the mayors along the border on both sides. And usually it's an annual luncheon where they, you know, they'll do a slideshow of success in the region, et cetera. It's a great thing. It's wonderful to have those relationships. But what we want to add is advocacy. You know, if that group becomes an advocacy group, you know, now it's not just Mayor Gloria and Jason on the hill in San Ysidro screaming, "We're dying," right? If I've got 40 or 50 mayors saying the same thing, then Washington has to start listening.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think that with all the news in the last couple of years about the border, not just about the closure of the border due to COVID, but about people migrating from other countries through Mexico to come here, the detentions, all that sort of thing, how is that affecting just the general population's understanding of what it means to be a border community?
Well, you know, therein lies our largest problem. And the reason that these border restrictions that should have been lifted over a year ago took 19 months to get lifted is because we can't get, I always talk about the guy in Ohio, but you know, the person that's not in a border community to understand the differences in you know, between all of those issues. So for example, you know, the migrant waves, while that impacts the CBP's abilities to work at the port of entry, it's got nothing to do with sales in San Ysidro or with grandparents visiting their grandkids in Tijuana. And so it's the conflation of those issues that impacts us, and 90% of the time on you know, to a negative way.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you feel like the broader sort of San Diego and Imperial County population understands? Does it feel like people in other places know that they're part of a border community?
Right. You know, it's funny. We often use, you know, San Antonio, Texas is a border town.
Yeah.
Yet they're 300 miles from the border. They believe they're a border town more than San Diego does. I can't tell you how many people have told me that, you know, live just north of the 94. Let's not even go north of the 8. That says, you know, I haven't been to Tijuana in 20 years, or I haven't done this in 30 years. So it's interesting. You know, it's part of the attractiveness of San Diego. There's just so much to do that parts get left out, but I can tell you, if you're not crossing the border, you're missing out on some of the best food you'll ever have, on some of the best rates on tourism you'll ever have. And if you're in Mexico and not coming back up, you're missing out on opportunities to get, you know, great items at great prices.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. What would be sort of the policy change that you'd hope to see? I think it's probably tied to this idea of getting more people to recognize that we are all together. We're all in together on this, right? Like the fate of what happens in San Ysidro on the border impacts if you live in Oceanside or El Centro or Poway. Like, it matters. Is there a story that we should be telling?
Well, you know, I think for San Ysidro, it always comes down to the gentleman or the gentlelady that's in the booth, right? Border wait times, how long they take to process you. Because when wait times are down and there's an ease to legally cross that border, the good stories are going to happen. And, you know, your neighbor's going to tell you about the time that they went down to Avenida Revolucion and they, you know, took pictures with the painted donkey. And you know, the time they went down to Rosarito, or, you know, this and that. Those stories are going to happen. Those interactions are going to happen. That's why we're a binational region, and we can grow from that. But again, it's just the ability to get to see one another. So beyond the advocacy of the Border Mayors Conference, one of the other points that we're really pushing is that there be some kind of cabinet level committee, if you will, that includes private stakeholders such as chambers and so forth, that is actively looking at measuring the border wait times effects on our economy and on our lives. There used to be a time long ago, we worked with then CBP Commissioner Alan Burson, not only implementing the saying, but the implementing execution of a balance between economy and security. The reality is you can't have one without the other. And so he implemented that, and it got down to that gentle person in the booth. And if wait times started getting crazy, a simple call would get things back down. Unfortunately, with the fast presidential administration, those relationships changed, and CBP went back to working in a silo. So again, if we had what I see as some kind of a working group that includes the Secretary of Economy, the Commerce and Trade, the Secretary of State, because that's where our consuls are, right, that are here on the ground level, and that private stakeholder group. Just so that everybody knows we're watching and measuring those wait times, life could be better for all of us.
So it's an operational question. I'd say this is an economic engine, and there are certain bottlenecks, of which in particular wait times are one.
Right.
So we really just have to be thinking about that. Yeah. So interesting, and yet still having to deal with how do we create this sort of welcoming environment so that when people are crossing in either direction, this isn't about crossing through a sort of militarized experience, but rather like the gateway to a new...
And now you're getting to the whole point that we're here.
Yeah, yes.
Right? San Isidro, I've talked about the damage that has been suffered. We really have an opportunity to be, for the future of San Isidro, to become America's finest front door to America's finest city. We have almost a blank board. With all those lost businesses, of course, our efforts are on helping those that have survived, but we've also got to put forth efforts on bringing new ones in. And it's really hard when you've got, I can tell you there's, 23,000 pedestrians that'll come into San Isidro each day. But my office, which is a block and a half down the road, 2 people can't walk shoulder to shoulder on the sidewalk because it's about that. So it's bringing the infrastructure up to the capacity of what our community is.
But tell the mayor we need sexy streets in San Isidro.
Absolutely. So we've actually, I don't know of another chamber that's done this. We've actually come up with the San Isidro Recovery Plan that has those 2 advocacy points that we talked about, but then also has a series of other, there's infrastructure improvements, then also a large pilot program for businesses. One thing that we've seen is with such an impact to the businesses on the decision to allow people to not be able to visit or not be able to visit, e-commerce is a way that we can diversify some of those sales. We're San Isidro. We're always going to be there for the border crosser. But if I can help a business increase his sales by 25-30% online, then maybe he can stick through a couple months of a border crossing restriction, or be able to last, or maybe lay off 1 or 2 less people than they did. Through the pandemic, 2,100 jobs were lost. Those are 2,000 families that lost their ability to feed their children. That's what we want to stop, and I think we can do that. We're going to need some help.
I mean, that's a big deal. 2,100 jobs in a population of 35,000 is high percentages. So the border is going to reopen to non-essential travel, quote unquote. Next month.
Next week.
What's that going to change? How's it going to look different?
So first of all, that's a government term. Every crossing, every person that crosses, every purchase that's made when they cross, they're all essential. Right, all of those 2,100 children that need their family's job to eat, they're all essential. So these are work-related and non-work-related crossings. So what will this mean? This is our lifeline. And so yes, actually a week from today, so on November 8th, the restrictions will be lifted for vaccinated visitors. I was at a conference this morning, and I think CBP is going to handle that well. Like I said, it always comes down to that wait time, right? And so they're going to be doing intermediate checking, right, of those vaccines. Everybody needs to have them, but they're not going to be checking 100%, which would cause a lockdown anyway. But yeah, we're very happy that our families and visitors are going to be able to come to visit us again. Like I said, we just need to go work on that recovery plan to maximize what this will mean for us in the future.
So you're a chamber of commerce, meaning you're there for the businesses. Do you play with philanthropy? Are you seeing investments? Are you seeing grants to support the work you're doing?
Yeah, you know, it hasn't so far. And here's everyone's chance. We've seen in the last year and a half to 2 years, you know, Sandag has put social equity into their mission statement. We've got a new mayor and a new supervisor that are both pushing social equity. Now it's time to see if those social equity dollars get south of the 94. Like I said, with this plan, you know, we've got several items that have large tickets on them. So all of that support that all of these organizations and officials have given us through the 19 months of struggling, you know, we want to make sure that they're there for us for the next 12 months of growth.
Yeah, so it's about relationships, right?
Absolutely.
It's about knowing that responding in a time of urgency is important, but this can't be a sort of it comes and then it goes sort of thing. This has to be a
you know, that's the reason I'm an optimist by nature.
Me too.
But I've had to spend the last 19 months crying about doom and gloom. But you know, in part that was to really get our story out. Not just so much to cry about it, but to say, look, this is an actual American community being affected this way with no recourse. We're going to need some help getting out of this hole, and so that's what it's all about. Hopefully we've made those relationships you referred to make this happen.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's about strengthening our community as a whole. This isn't about a handout or dividing and allocating resources. This is about
you know, we talked about those domino effects of the border closures. Well, there's also domino effects if we're able to rebuild and become, again, America's finest front door. That's going to help all of San Diego County.
I believe it. And we can walk back and forth through that front door as freely as possible.
And enjoy the sweet parts of both of our lives.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. This is wonderful, and we look forward to continuing to explore all that San Ysidro has to offer and who we are as a border community.
Absolutely. Thank you.
In the San Diego region, there are 17 federally recognized tribal nations with jurisdiction over 18 reservations, the most of any county in the United States. The place many of us call home is the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay people. Javier Guerrero is committed to our region's first people in making authentic relationships that fuel collaboration. And he's growing a regenerative organic farm rooted in Jewish values to help do just that.
My name is Javier Guerrero, President and CEO of Coastal Roots Farm.
Lorraine Orozco. I am the Executive Director for the San Pasqual Education Department for the San Pasqual Band of Indians.
And at Coastal Roots Farm, you know, we're practicing regenerative organic farming with equitable access, and we're providing that food to people in the community. And, you know, that's a whole endeavor on its own. And then on another side, the farm is also a platform for environmental education and building community, and how we bring people to the farm, you know, from early childhood through intergenerational seniors, you know, school-age children and so on. That's a challenge of how you balance a real production farm with creating a space and place for the education and community that can happen there.
Our relationship with Javier and working with him has gone way back. It seems like every position Javier has, he has some kind of connection and tie to the Kumeyaay Nation.
The food that we grow, instead of the education where people are coming to the farm, the food that we're growing is actually going out into the community. And so that's either through coming to our Pay What You Can farm stand there on the property where people can pay as much as they'd like, up to $30, and come twice a week on Thursday and Sunday, or our food donation, our organic food distribution program, which is our food donation program, and that's going out to communities throughout the region, from, you know, active duty, low enlisted active duty veteran communities to, you know, low income Latino communities, low income seniors, seniors of all different backgrounds, Holocaust survivors, as well as a food distribution that we actually took on during COVID, providing for homebound elderly tribal members, both partnering with the American Indian Health Center and the Ipai Nation of San Isabel.
Kumeyaay people have been all over San Diego County, all the way into Imperial County. Ocean, mountains, and desert is our territory. It's always nice to have that partnership and that ally in the community. We do have a growing population, but I don't think there's awareness of our community, and the people that do you know, recognize us from the outside community, you know, associate us with the casino. I've seen people automatically say they're a gaming tribe, they have a casino, they must have tons of money, and kind of just leave it at that. We have a small population, so that kind of turns away some funders and opportunities as well. We're northern Kumeyaay, we're Ipai. Southern Kumeyaay are Tipai, so those are different types of areas, dialects, those types of things, but we are all Kumeyaay. And we now are able to, you know, work together on different objectives. Our traditional village is in Samposqual Valley, where approximately where Safari Park is, and we were removed in the late 1800s and kind of lost until there was some awareness that this land was set aside for our people, and then building it back and coming to a place that wasn't really our family's land, but making it into our home and our community.
The notion of creating equitable access to any of the work that we're doing is ultimately what's truly inspiring for me.
This group of young people, they're very enthusiastic and very proud of who they are. Being here for 20 years, I've got to see lots of students grow up and attend our programs and now become very successful.
So happy to be here with you. Always love spending time with you. And just thinking that we've known each other for a while, probably close to 20 years. What keeps us coming back? What do you feel's the connection? Like, what is that?
It's a combination of things, I think. The topics and the spaces that you've been involved with have this connection to the Kumeyaay Nation, and then also the way you approach our community in just a genuine, down-to-earth, personable, respectful way, I think is opening for our people. You have this innate way about you to know how to respectfully enter a community and partner. So there's comfort and community and respect. I noticed that for us.
Well, I can definitely say I've always felt very welcome.
Good.
You know, and I think that comfort in any relationship, you know, goes both ways. And
Nice.
so I think, you know, just super excited to work with the youth, and especially you specifically.
Nice.
You know, anything that involves like the kids and families. And I think there's so many ways to get involved. And so I'm really excited that, you know, now here with the farm that we get to do this even more, and I think on more levels.
Definitely.
And what do you think's grown and what do you think's changed over that time? Because, you know, thinking about like through a couple different organizations, I know I was thinking that, you know, you've gone through your career professionally, and I've gone through mine, but there's always this connection. Like, what do you think has changed most about our relationship in that time and just how we're able to work together?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, we keep on doing the same thing we do, obviously education, community, you know, wellness, those topics of identity and community always tie back to things you have always been involved with. So I think you've had a lot more change probably than we have, but how does that bring you back to us?
Yeah, you know, well, it's funny because, you know, I think that even going from the time of the Museum of Man and now, you know, now the Museum of Us.
Yeah.
And there was kind of a natural thing there in terms of working with tribal communities throughout the region. But then when I went to the Children's Museum, I was kind of wondering, like, you know, I built, you know, there's these relationships there, and I wasn't really sure how that would plug in. And I think it was really nice when, you know, I'd start to get phone calls or I'd meet people, and it was like, you know, bring the kids to the Children's Museum, you know, and that natural open relationship just felt really good and having an interest. But I think now with the farm, it's really exciting, especially, you know, we started to do these like food donation programs into the community. But now the idea of like some of these new projects, you know, to where it's not just about bringing food out in the community, but how can we help the community grow food?
Right.
And also bring the kids out to the farm so they can learn how to grow food.
Right.
And the health and wellness components.
I think that's, I know you just touched on a lot of things, but Museum of Man is like so much of our identity from the past. And, you know, our children and the Children's Museum is so much about, you know, our future. And then, but it's nice to now have the wellness and the garden and the nutrition aspect because of the present, because we're still here. We're still here. And so your background with the Museum of Man gave you a whole foundation for who we are. So that's, you already kind of knew who we are working there, and all the past and our ancestors and our connection to San Diego and the surrounding areas. I like that we're now full circle to the present and the work that needs to be done, and the essence of a community and keeping that community whole and healthy. So that's been great for us.
I'm so excited about what's coming up.
Yeah, me too.
So going further with our little program here, what would you want to ask me?
So a lot, because you know, I'm not familiar. Well, I mean, farming is always you know, in our community, but being on the reservation, we have some challenges. But it's interesting to know about regenerative agriculture. Tell me about that and how that's part of making a more just society, or what's your mission and outreach into the community?
Well, it's interesting because when I came to the farm, you know, in terms of, so like, because, you know, honestly, you know, I wasn't, you know, I've had these careers. I wasn't a farmer when I came. So, you know, I'm gonna be honest. You know, I was learning about regenerative agriculture myself as I came to the farm. But really, you know, ultimately, it's about, when we think about farming, a lot of times I think people think about food and they think about the land, but then also, you know, it's about caring for people and planet.
Right.
And we're all connected to that. And I think there's so much interest right now in terms of like growing food in a sustainable way that's not using harmful pesticides and fertilizers, but also, you know, in the foods we grow that might be culturally appropriate, and they might be something that recognizes of growing foods that are traditional to that land, and also acknowledging how native plants can and pollinators can help growing the food and so on. And it was really cool. I mean, you came out for, you know, we when we showed one of our recent films at the farm, and it was, you know, about tribal food sovereignty.
Right.
You know, and I think there's so much that can be taught and learned around how we grow food. And so I'm really excited that there's an interest in how we can support and partner to actually bring some of that knowledge of how we're growing in a sustainable way from the farm and actually bring it to the community, bring it to San Pasqual, bring it to Campo, bring it to some of the other tribal reservations.
Nice.
Super exciting.
I think you were just getting to what I was thinking about. You know, how does that connection to people, land, and food, how you just described, how does it, you know, you kind of touched on it in relating to building a better future.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, it's so critical now more than ever. And I think, you know, around any kind of educational programming that's going to bring awareness, not just for the adults, but really for the youth, for children. And, you know, they are going to inherit everything that we've done to this planet and everything going forward. So we really want to position them well. And I think going back to the tribal food sovereignty side of it, you know, and maybe you can even speak to this more, like maybe that little bit of history, the lands where the reservations are not necessarily like the only lands, right? Like how, maybe just so people can understand that piece of the history, why the reservations are there. Because when we talk about you know, the diversity of foods and sustainability in the region, and it was thriving.
Right.
And now where people are kind of positioned where they're needing to survive.
Right, right. It's a good description of the reservations because we did have the whole region before contact, and San Diego's so rich and biodiverse, and that's what sustained the Kumeyaay people for, you know, they were very healthy people before contact. After contact, it was a difficult time. And now we're not able to, you know, gather in our traditional areas or have the villages that we did or travel down to the ocean for certain times of years. And so we're trying to bring that back because our health has suffered as a result of the past, you know, 400 years. The difference we've in our history had Kumeyays that have lived into their past hundreds, 120, and that is the knowledge, the traditional knowledge and the foods they ate and everything that San Diego can provide. I think when people come into San Diego, they look at the chaparral and the sagebrush as weeds and not important. And we have this traditional knowledge where it sustained us and we thrived. So being on the reservation, as we saw earlier, you know, San Pasqual Valley is our traditional Indian village, rich, rich farmland with a river that used to run through there. A lot of waterways that don't exist anymore in San Diego, but those were our natural areas where we processed our foods and gathered and had our villages. But being on the reservation, now we're in more desolate, I described it to you earlier, granite, rock.
And that was not by choice.
Not by choice.
Because oftentimes when people say San Pasqual, it's like, oh yeah, San Pasqual. I know where the reservation. They're like, no.
It is a different San Pasqual now. San Pasqual that we were removed from our rich farmland and by the waterways into, and there's a historian that wrote a book, Pushed into the Rocks, because basically we are pushed into the rocks. And so we are on granite. It's very difficult to cultivate. It's very difficult. We were intended to sustain ourselves as farmers when we were placed on these reservations, but not having the water and the soil and the means to do that. So I think going full circle and being able to have that ability to do that is important still.
Which is super fun, right? With the project that we're talking about.
And kids will love it. They'll learn about nutrition. And it can kind of be more of a reality where we're self-sustained instead of reliant on outside or reliant on, we can be self-sufficient.
So I'm going to share with our listeners here, so what we're talking about is a project where just kind of being open because there is this relationship of trust, right? And just being open to what can come. And so when we first came out to visit, and we were like, oh great, let's get the kids to, you know, come to the farm and, you know, come out and see what you're doing. You have a propagation house there, a native plant trail and so on. But we went out there and realized, oh my gosh, like you all are like interested in growing food there. And so what we're doing now is, you know, planning up to have garden beds and a small farm operation of sorts right there, adjacent to the education center.
Right.
Engaging college youth from SDSU and our farm team and bringing in that knowledge of farming and growing to see how we can collaborate and create this kind of holistic view of how do you grow food,
right?
What's involved, creating those education, and I would even say career opportunities.
True.
Right?
Very true.
For youth.
Very true. It's a whole nother education in itself, but to do that at young ages and then in a community setting, I know the older kids are excited to know what you do and deliver food to the elders on the different reservations. They're very interested in doing that, taking care of their elders and the people, but also just an opportunity to teach them that this is possible. This is possible.
You know, I think we talk about how, you know, I see funders in the community wanting to get involved, you know, and I think, you know, we were having a conversation just earlier today about what that looks like and how we can conceive and identify a need in the community that's truly meaningful, that's truly impactful, and how people can get involved and support. What do you feel are some of those needs that you're facing in the community that are both either addressed by some of the projects that we've been talking about, or other needs that you see, through the eyes of the Education Center?
Yeah, I mean, educationally, it's going to be amazing. I know that our young people are interested, and then they can find the connection with how it could actually, heal our community. Just in that transition from being disconnected with nature in that way and rebuilding that connection with earth, with the seasons, with all of these things that go along with gardening and the plants and everything that's around us, and learning about their own traditional foods with native plants at the same time, and how our people have been, suffering. Diabetes is huge. And then all the ailments that go along with not having that holistic diet, and bringing that into the community. I think everybody's excited for, and it'll open your eyes that you can take these things and heal your community. And there are people that are interested, like you're talking about. There are people that want to assist with those things that have been broken and hurt over history, and rebuild and heal those things.
So good. And I think about, we started, thanks to, it was actually the Food Funders group at San Diego Grantmakers, now Catalyst, that first gave us the financial support to incorporate bringing food to American Indian Health Center, and out to the Ipai Nation of San Isabel. But just to see how that's blossomed, and that initial seed funding, again, from Catalyst and the Food Funders group, has really allowed us to take that project into year 2 and expand it in all these different directions. And it's just exciting to me to think about what that will bring, and if it can meet some of those bigger needs in the community. As I was just thinking a second ago, language and food, that kind of connects. That's like, if you're connecting food and you're focusing on language, that's a big part of any culture, any community.
Definitely. It's the foundation. So to have that present, to heal, to be part of that in education, and part of that in community, it is. I agree.
So when working towards change, what do you value about being part of a network of individuals and institutions like Catalyst? So when working towards change, what do you value about being part of a network of these individuals and organizations that can kind of address things across the spectrum of needs in the community?
So
and bring in resources.
You've touched on a couple of things. I mean, I think the Kumeyaay people have a lot to offer the whole region on how we sustained ourselves, trends that are going into the future. We were stewards of this land, and we see the issues with, a lot of different issues across the board with, the fires that we have now, with taking care of, still being good stewards of the land, but looking at it from maybe a Kumeyaay perspective in the traditional way, and sharing that with the San Diego region, sharing that with the larger community, having an opportunity to say this is who we are, and we have sustained ourselves for this long, and this knowledge has sustained us, to share that and who we are in our history, and for people to come into San Diego and have that, or be San Diego residents and know that, I think is part of our goal, because we've been here for thousands and thousands of years in comparison to a few hundred years. So we like that opportunity. We think we have a lot to share with the region and share of who we are. And we really appreciate that people are now taking interest and knowing, these people are the first people of this area. San Diego is probably one of the best places to live in the world, and learn from the people who are first there, have been here, who have survived all this time, is a story to tell. And our mission is to not only sustain our community, but help them thrive, preserve our culture. So in these opportunities and partnerships, I think that it gives us an opportunity where students and the community can feel pride in who they are, and come full circle with that after the difficulties of our ancestors and our grandparents and great-grandparents. You know, they suffered for a reason, so now we're able to thrive. And that's where I see kind of the exchange and the work together.
Yeah, I think for organizations, and albeit funders or nonprofits or businesses that want to get involved, I think it goes back to what this, the notion of all in, right? And like to be truthful about your intentions. As I was taught early on, as I shared that story of being aware of what you're able to do and you're not able to do, be truthful to your limitations, be truthful to who you are, say bring your authentic self. And then good things can come, but it does start with that relationship, as we know.
It does. And I think that's what's maintained our relationship too. Exactly what you described.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello. I'm honored today to be joined by my colleague, Pamela Gray Payton of the San Diego Foundation. Hey,
hi, Marcus.
Hey there. Hey there. I understand that as San Diego Foundation's Chief Impact and Partnerships Officer, you've helped direct $66 million, is that right? $66 million for local COVID response. You've launched the Black Community Investment Fund, and you've enabled community-led solutions across San Diego. And from what I understand, you have some very flattering social media comments on your Twitter in particular from some esteemed colleagues locally. If you could give us a sense of your journey of how you've gotten here, we'd love to learn from your experience. So what have been some of your key observations along the journey?
Well, I'd love to tell you about my journey. I started with the San Diego Foundation June 1st of 2020. So imagine where we were, what was happening at that time.
Yeah,
I had worked in higher education for almost 24 years, and had this moment of clarity in late 2019 when my youngest daughter said, "You're free to go and do whatever you want to do." And really had to ask myself, what was that? Not looking at what I had done in my career, what I was doing at the time in higher education, but really, if I could do anything, what would I do? And what I recognized is that what brought me the most joy was the work that I was doing in the community. I served on a couple of boards. I'd been a volunteer with some really wonderful organizations, and saw that these organizations were making such an impact in our community in spite of the lack of resources. And so I thought, how could I help to bring resources to these very, very noble, intentional organizations in a way that was not just going to sustain them, but really bring resources to the community. And so it was in that moment that I thought, I will have to start my own company. That is the only way that I will be able to do this work. And then the opportunity to join the San Diego Foundation in this role came my way. And early on, this was now in March of 2020, I watched, as the rest of the region did, how the San Diego Foundation was responded through its COVID Community Response Fund, and thought I could very well be a part of that. And here we are. I started June 1st and have not looked back once. It's been a journey like no other, but I am so grateful for this experience and the time that I joined the organization, because they've moved in a direction that I think the community and the region desperately needed. And so to see that unfolding and being a part of that is just incredibly gratifying for me personally. And to feel, that our team, our organization is making a difference in lives really is very, very gratifying work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's, just sharing the stage with you now, there's a sense of grace that is easily perceived. And so it's almost not surprising to hear that your journey has unfolded in the way that it has. But I'd love to represent the voice of some folks who maybe grace doesn't come so easily for them. What are some observations you made along the way that might be instructive for some of us who are really interested in capitalizing on this moment, where there seems to be a historical openness for reimagining our systems, for doing things differently. You've been successful in some ways that are implicit in your story, but maybe you can give us an example or two of some things that are a little more explicit.
You know, what I have seen is, and this again, going back to our community, our COVID Community Response Fund, was that the needs are grave across the region. And there are organizations who perhaps have never partnered with an organization like mine, smaller grassroots nonprofits, who work really hard bringing desperately needed relief across the region, but had not been a part of the institution. And so we really wanted to learn as much as we could from these nonprofits to direct our philanthropy. And that has been so instrumental to the work that we've done. And it's something that I would recommend for any organization, to listen to the community. You know, they know what they need. They just haven't been heard. They haven't been asked. So we really have extended this table to invite as many people to the table as we can. Now, granted, with our fund, we were able to distribute $66 million in the course of our COVID Community Response Fund, but the request far exceeded what we were able to give.
I understand.
But yet at the same time, I think we were very intentional about ensuring that there was a broad representation of the community and serving very strategically different types of issues. And so I really encourage other organizations to invite the community to the table. You know, we can't know what others need without asking and without being willing to listen. And that is what I hope that we've been able to do effectively at the San Diego Foundation, and one that I hope to see more organizations doing at the same time.
Oh, I love that. Certainly it's been my experience with some of your colleague organizations that represent the GEO community. There's an openness to community. There's a conversation around community that at the awareness level, if you will, is logical. There's a desire to move forward in that way. And then within our cohort experience, when we roll up our sleeves together to do the work, to grapple with the complexity of operationalizing those values, our missions, our visions, I've noticed that there's a bit of a struggle to move from the idea and the awareness to the action. Again, I know that you care about the reality and you care about community and establishing what I refer to as a generative relationship with those in community. But how do we do that with large institutions who by design weren't necessarily in the business of establishing community? Perhaps even were more interested in return on investment under different circumstances.
It's a great question. And recently I participated in a cohort with other peers across the country who represented 20 different community foundations. And within that community, I learned that everyone, didn't have the experience that I had. In our case, I've explained to you to some degree how intentional we've been about this approach. But for a lot of my peers, that has not been easy. And in some cases, they've had to abandon what looked like logical focus on racial and social justice, which is the moment that we're in right now. Because there was a lack of support within their organization, perhaps within the board, or in the case, in organizations like ours with the donor community. Not everyone feels that this is the way they want to invest their resources. And so in our case, and in what I hope becomes normalized, is that let's be honest with ourselves. Let's look at our region. Let's look at our communities. Let's look at the cities that we have a responsibility to support and understand what those needs are. And instead of prioritizing, one over the other, is there a way that we can do both? Is there a way that we can support our fund holders and also support our community with what it really is asking and saying it needs. And I believe it is possible. You know, in fact, I think for those courageous organizations, what you may often find is that you're going to bring along new donors, new partners who previously did not see the vision, didn't see that you shared that vision with them. And in light of in our case, moving along this particular path, we've been able to identify some new partners that are just happy to see the commitment. We started last year with a development of a new strategic plan that was approved by our board in June of this year. And it's very, very focused on justice, equity, and resilience, advancing racial and social justice. We say it. We actually say advancing racial and social justice, fostering equity of opportunity, building resilient communities, and developing world-class philanthropy. We can't do anything without the philanthropic support.
For sure.
And so it's really giving purpose to the work that has served to benefit our staff, our leadership, our board, our donors. Everyone knows where we're moving. And the respect and the appreciation for that, I think, has given everyone clarity that perhaps might have been lacking previously. But it's a focus that responds to the needs of the moment. We're at a crossroads, you know, in our world. And you have an opportunity to either acknowledge that crossroads and respond accordingly, or be ignorant to what your community is actually saying is needed and continue down the path that we were on previously. I am very, very pleased that our organization saw the crossroads as an opportunity to course correct and to really redirect ourselves in a way that is responsive.
I am too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Before we dig into any more questions, I just wonder if there's anything in particular, particularly with that framing of the crossroads, where we find ourselves. Has there been anything that just stood out as particularly frustrating or a tricky dynamic that you're either wrestling with now or you had to address as a part of this transformative experience at the foundation?
You know, if anything, I'd say just wanting to do more and not having the resources. I mean, as a result of saying who we are, you suddenly start to hear from organizations that had not previously.
On the grantee side.
From grantees, exactly, who perhaps previously were unknown to us. And now that you see them and you recognize the work that they're doing and how it really intersects with the priorities, we want to fund everyone. You know, we want to support all of these organizations to both from a capacity building level, but also to have impact in the community. And just not having the resources to do all of that work, it would be wonderful if I'm happy to open up the big bucket and just let it all pour in. But that probably is my greatest frustration, is just not having enough resources to respond to all the really critical needs in the community.
I get it.
I'm grateful for what we do have and what we are able to do with those resources. But if there were any frustration, it's just, how do we bring more people on board?
For sure. So we need those donors. We need more donors. Got it. And to be fair, we also understand that philanthropy is just a part of the equation. So the total mosaic for San Diego and Imperial counties includes government. It includes all types of municipal actors, folks across various sectors, private sector partners. So the invitation is to all of them.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
We've recently really established some great relationships with the government offices in the region that have enabled us to support their work through philanthropy into the community, serving everything from childcare providers to supporting education, providing, responding to the digital needs of kids. The government has played such an important role in our ability to be responsive to the community. And there are more resources coming into cities and municipalities across the country as a result of, most recently, the American Rescue Plan, but other funds as well. So I encourage organizations to look at those resources and how to best utilize them.
Wow, well, what a treat for me to be able to do this. I have another question, if I may.
Oh, dear.
But no, it's really just based upon what you said. I mean, I meant it when I talked about the grace that you exude. And even in the story, from this seat, what I'm hearing is that you had something to do with the quality of the relationship between the foundation and the government, municipal actors. It's not just something that happens with across every story that I hear, right? And so I'm just wondering again, what is it that you have brought? Perhaps you haven't even thought about it; it just comes natural to you. But for those of us who are in cities where there's some territorial considerations, some parochial dynamics that tend to characterize our regional activities as grant makers. Again, just how have you observed that space? And particularly, how have you navigated the foundation to be able to capitalize in a way that you described? I promise that would be my last question for now.
You know, I would just like to think that I wake up every day living my purpose. And that if I am fortunate enough to be in this role and to match these things that I care so deeply about together to affect change, that's what I'm going to do. I have had the pleasure of working in government. I've worked in, as I mentioned, higher education. I've worked with other nonprofit organizations that are doing important work. But to finally be in a place where all of these relationships that I've established over many years in San Diego are finally able, I can bring everyone to the table.
Yeah, it's like a purpose-driven moment.
It's like a puzzle.
Yeah.
And the puzzle pieces are finally coming together, and I can connect pieces that didn't know each other previously to do important work that they're both very focused and intentionally on. That's what I'm able to do right now. And I really see it as really a confluence of so many things happening simultaneously. The pandemic and the tragedy that it has brought really meant that organizations like ours needed to stand up. And I'm proud that we did. Having a person who leads our organization that is incredibly compassionate and cares deeply and is also very, very kind and generous and understands the philanthropic community much better than I do. And then having a board that said, what can we do, Pam?
Yeah.
How can we help? To be willing to step up and build programs like our Black Community Investment Fund and to invest $1 million in the fund to help buyers purchase their first home. These are highly unusual, but very, very specific approaches that our organization has invested in. And it's, I don't know that it might have happened a decade ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago. It's happening now. And in this moment, we're doing everything that we can to really support the growth of the region for everyone.
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'd love to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
I heard you saying earlier that now is a time for change.
Yes.
Why? Why is it now?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm very conscientious about speaking in terms of what the GO community teaches us. And so in that context, it's as much my personal point of view as much as it is this group of funders committed to transforming philanthropic culture and practices, right? And so as I described, and you so eloquently described just a few minutes ago, this moment is characterized by so much openness, right? Despite the upheaval, the ambiguity, the complexity of our work to respond to a situation that none of us have seen before, and in ways that we weren't even designed, we weren't even structured to respond. Your COVID response, I'm sure you had to change some rules and do some gymnastics that not everyone is capable of doing. And so I've seen enough stories. We've had enough testimonial across the organizations that comprise our membership to see the pattern. And the pattern is clear. And they're asking, now that we know what to do, now that we're committed to this change. We saw how atrocious this is. We can't believe it's so bad. What can we do?
Right.
What can we do? And anytime someone is vulnerable enough to ask, to acknowledge, I don't know what to do, I feel like it's incumbent upon organizations that refer to themselves as philanthropy serving. We like to say philanthropy mobilizing organizations. We say, come over here. We'll meet you where you are. As long as you're committed to changing the conditions from the status quo, which we all have at this point acknowledged was falling short of our own expectations, our collective aspirations, then we'll meet you with the kinds of resources that are responsive to wherever you are on your journey of growth. And we'll be there to support you through as an accountability partner, to remind you when you made that declaration at one time, and it's a little different than the behavior we see today. We'll say, hey, this looks a little different. Help us understand the difference here. But we won't leave you behind, right? And we just believe that in relationship, built on trust, that's where we establish the kind of accountability that can translate into the kind of action that you exhibited so plainly, so exemplary at the foundation. Yeah.
And if I can ask you a question similar to what you asked me, what frustrations are you experiencing?
Well, it's interesting. I just wish there was more time. I don't often experience frustrations. I'm aware of, personally, I understand frustration to be a result of when we try to make something happen. It's a result of an emotional reaction to forcing something. I want change to happen differently than it is right now. And so I've kind of come to grips with that over time to say, if it takes 30 years to reverse 300 years of inequity and harm, then you know what, sign me up for that 30. I'll ride it out. And if that means I only participate in a percentage of that, then at least I'm contributing to the liberation of a population or a group of leaders that comes after me.
Yes.
And so it's a generational approach to this work, and that changes the frustration to hope and optimism. Honestly, I'll have to say, and I'm curious about you, within this context of adjusting and allowing myself to be open and vulnerable, express myself fully in response to these different conditions, I've had to allow myself to be shaped by the thing itself, moving through adversity as opposed to around it, under it, avoid. The way to is through. It is another thing that we understand from our community. And so I use the services of coaches, executive coaches for my team, for myself. I've been an executive coach now for over a decade. And it's an acknowledgement that there's a personal impact to these structural barriers. And without addressing them both, I think we leave ourselves susceptible to ongoing frustration that can materialize physically as illness. And that doesn't serve any of us. So how does that resonate, and how you take care of yourself, or how you think about self-care within this context before we wrap up?
Interestingly, it's been a year like no other for me personally, from a health standpoint. And what I recognized was that my work actually invigorated me during a time where I might have had a different response. And so I find that the balance between the work and caring for myself and my family and all the other responsibilities that I have is hard. And so at no point do I think that it's balanced. It's a little bit more here this week and a little bit more there next week.
I can relate to that.
But just keeping my eye on my purpose, my goals. What is it that we're trying to accomplish as an organization? What am I trying to do personally? Is all so essential for me to organize and to be organized, and to have people who set me straight, when I need it, I have a really, really fantastic team of colleagues that I work with that are always helping to educate me, and we look out for each other.
Yeah.
You know, we try to make sure that the work is balanced to the extent that it can be, and step in to help one another when needed. But also learning. You know, this world is new to me. This is not the work that I did for the first part of my career. And so jumping in at this moment, at this really, really critical moment where so much about philanthropy was changing, gave me a chance to come in with a completely different perspective than someone who needed to be shifted and
I got you.
I came in ready and open to see things anew. And I have really found that invigorating, to be completely honest with you. It's hard, you know, as I said earlier, because the demands are so grave, and when you care the way we care, it's hard not to be touched by what you're experiencing, what you're seeing. But I find that being focused on the work and what can we do organizationally, and what can I do personally, really just gives me energy. I wake up, I still wake up and I pinch myself.
I tell you, my participation in Catalyst provides that same thing for me. Just a network of folks that I know are accountability partners, allies, sounding boards, for all of the things that you described. Even being a part of this amazing opportunity to get to know you a little bit. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for asking me about my perspective and providing an opportunity to share a little bit about the GEO network, about which I'm so passionate as well. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future.
Same here. Thank you.
Wow, you too.
Wow, look at this.
I can't imagine a better way to wrap up than the reflections that you just shared. I want to invite you into one last vision to leave us with. Marcus opened up with the framework and what we were going to learn. But what is hopeful about this time? We talked about, or you talked about, why it's a moment for change, why we're progressing towards something built on relationships and trust. What is that something?
You want to go first?
You both are looking at me. I know my orders here. Actually, I am very hopeful, in part because a story like this is not so uncommon anymore, right? There's a way in which someone could say, you know, this is a great example of why diversity is a part of this EI, right? It's not just equity, it's not just, but the composition of our field, the individuals within that space, the conditions for retention and support and connection to decision making matter. Like, I just heard firsthand an amazing example of that, and have the luxury of being able to see this in other spaces around the nation. And so that can only give me hope. It didn't used to be like that.
Yeah.
I remember making the case for equity a decade ago, and some people still being on the fence like, well, I know what the data says, but now that's a foregone conclusion. And so what a blessing.
I was just thinking about how Grant Makers for Effective Organizations, that's been the name for a long, long time, but now we are redefining what it means to be effective.
That's right. Without equity, you can't be as effective as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Right? We're making that claim. And what I heard from you is that it's time for philanthropy to make a claim, to take a stance. That's exciting.
And we're seeing that. You know, we're seeing that in philanthropy, not just locally, but across the country. When you look at a lot of the shifts and the resources that have been made available in the last year to address issues of equity and social justice, racial justice, no longer can we deny the inequities that have existed in our country for centuries. You said that earlier. Right. So not just not denying it, but actually doing something about it. That's where we all are today. And that's what gives me hope, is that there are enough of us who are saying it's time to do better, you know, without any without any disagreement, I think it's time for us to do better. And what does that mean for each organization? And it looks different, which is okay, because we all are needed. We're all being called to this moment.
Yes, absolutely. We are all called. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today and for setting that vision out in front of us and sharing your real, authentic selves, right? Not sugarcoating the challenges, difficulties, frustrations, but also knowing that when we're in this together, when we're all in, that there is a path forward. And I think that hope and optimism for the future is what keeps us going.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's good to,
well,
good to have this conversation with you.
Indeed.
That is the conclusion of All In for 2021. And I hope that you were able to learn something about this great region that we have, San Diego and Imperial counties, the people working in and for it, and about yourself. And to think about what are your frustrations and what are the ways that you are going to build towards the future? Because it's one thing to have the conversation, to raise awareness, and it is another thing then to act. And Catalyst is here to be your partner in action alongside GEO, alongside the San Diego Foundation, alongside every one of our members and partners. So we hope you'll reach out to us and tell us what struck you today and how we can help be that partner on your journey, so that when we look back in 5 more years, we don't say, well, we learned some lessons, but then we went back to the way things were, because that was how it was done. That was the easy path, because we're not here to take the easy path. We're here to build towards a future that undoes the systems that promote inequity that were so obvious in the last couple of years, and rebuild new ways of thinking. Things that don't even exist yet today. But when we do these things together, we can be all in, not just for ourselves or our organizations, but for every relation that we have in this beautiful and incredibly vibrant region. We also have some follow-on programs, so keep an eye out for the email that sends you a link so we can dive deeper with each of our speakers and have close conversations about what are the actions that we can all take together. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you again soon.